Hi, friends. So I've got here with me Dee Dee River, and I'm Tricia Roberts, and we're going to be talking about J.K. Rowling, the author of the many Harry Potter books. And she's written something. She has a past history of transphobia. And so we're wanting to talk about this recent post she's made, which she says explains her reasons for speaking out on sex and gender issues. So it says, warning, this piece contains inappropriate language for children. We'll just be reading out bits of this, and I'm going to get Dee Dee to give her sort of views on this. So she says...
Well, we'll have a discussion about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, back and forth.
Back and forth, okay. And you may need to project a little bit, Dee Dee, because I may not get the
phone over.
The phone over in time. So,
yeah.
So this isn't, it says here, this isn't an easy piece to write for reasons that will shortly become clear, but I know it's time to explain myself on an issue surrounded by toxicity. I write this without any desire to add to that toxicity. Well, she fell miserably there.
Okay, yes, and of course, a lot of the toxicity is caused by the people who are basically trying to give trans people a really hard time and make their life more difficult.
Yes, as if their life isn't difficult enough.
Life isn't difficult enough. They like to make sure that it's really bad.
Yeah. Now,
then they wonder why there's any toxicity and people complaining about this.
Yes. Now, Dee Dee's was one of the main people that was involved in transforming Tasmania, which was legislation that was
basically it was a change in the legislation in Tasmania around birth certificates. And what it did was eliminate any requirement for surgery and let people identify their gender on the basis of a statutory declaration. Basically, they could say, my gender is this, and that was enough. There didn't have to be a medical proof or a psychiatric proof or anything else. Now, that allows some people to change their birth certificates. This particular bit of legislation also changed the situation for young people and allowed young people to have their birth certificates changed with the support of their parents up until the age of 16, and then independently. Now, I'll say that in Australia, a child is considered basically legally emancipated at the age of 16. They can move out of home. They can make their own decisions. Actually, they can make their own decisions medically much younger than that in other areas. But the parents can basically also tell them to leave home at the age of 16. And so that's one of the reasons 16 was chosen as a breakover point where somebody could autonomously declare their gender.
So this was possibly some of the best legislation in the world, wasn't it, Dee Dee?
Yes. Our original intent was basically...
We don't want to spend too much time talking about that because we're actually supposed to be talking about J.K. Rowling.
J.K. Rowling, yes.
So we won't talk... we've actually done a video earlier on, probably it's almost a year ago now.
About the legislation itself.
About the legislation. If you go to the trans and gender playlist, you'll find it there. So we'll just talk about J.K. Rowling here. But anyway, Dee Dee was one of the main people that wrote the legislation for the Tasmanian Parliament, which passed on the lower and upper house. And so we're very pleased with that. And I was also involved in that, but not anywhere to the extent that Dee Dee was.
And we dealt with a huge amount of resistance from the Catholic Church, from a couple of TERFs who were really dedicated and worked very hard.
Yeah, now TERFs are transphobic...
Trans-exclusionary, radical feminists. We don't actually consider them radical feminists. No. Actually, they're just transphobic women.
Yeah, so we think
that's feminist about it.
It's doing an injustice to radical feminists and feminists by calling them TERFs. Okay, so now we'll get to, if we probably need to pick some certain ones that will in these paragraphs to focus on, but I'll quickly go. So for people who don't know, last December I tweeted support for Maya Forstater as tax specialist who lost her job for what were deemed transphobic tweets. She took her case to an employment tribunal, asking the judge to rule on whether a philosophical belief that sex is determined by biology is protected in law. Judge Taylor ruled that it wasn't.
Okay. I'd like to say, first off, that they weren't deemed to be transphobic tweets. They were transphobic tweets. The intent was basically to make to have a go at trans people by saying that they're not really the gender that they are, and that it's all based on biology and so on. And this is, of course, one of the areas where it really isn't feminist, because feminism really doesn't support the notion of biological essentialism. Biological essentialism say that men are men genetically, women are women genetically, and they're different. And so men, because they're intellectual and have mathematical and engineering skills, should be running things, and women, because they're empathic, should be looking after the babies and taking care of their man, stand by your man, and all of that.
But isn't that true, Dee Dee? Shouldn't it be like that? Anyway, okay, so...
No. Feminists would say, no, stuff you.
Oh no!
We're going to be whoever we want.
Oh no! I have to completely rewire my brain now. Okay, so I'll have to review all that I was taught when I was growing up. Okay, so
you too.
My interest in transit. Now she goes on. This is J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter books. My interest in trans issues predated Maya's case by almost 2 years, during which I followed the debate around the concept of gender identity closely. I met trans people and read sundry books, blogs, and articles by trans people, gender specialists, intersex people, psychologists, safeguarding experts, social workers, and doctors, and followed the discourse online and in traditional media. Well, it didn't do much good, did it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of people who are conservative, who follow what people say very closely to try and pick holes in them.
Sure.
I mean, there are a lot of people on the right who follow left speakers in order to attack them and find problems and issues in any way they possibly can.
Yeah, and I'd say she was probably
one of those.
Cherry picking that. Yeah. On one level, my interest in this issue has been professional because I'm writing a crime series. Oh God, really? Set in the present day, and my fictional female detective is of an age to be interested in and affected by these issues herself. But on another, it's intensely personal.
The detective a dyke, I wonder?
I don't know. It's intensely personal, as I'm about to explain. Well, that'd be really unfortunate if she actually manages to throw transphobia into her novel.
Yeah.
Okay, so all the time I've been researching and learning accusations.
She wouldn't be the first.
Yeah. Accusations and threats from trans activists have been bubbling in my Twitter timeline. Now, but we were just talking about this earlier, how anybody can say they're a trans activist and can have a go if they want to. I mean, I don't even know what a trans activist is.
I'd be a trans activist, I know, because I actually was working to change some laws.
Sure, but why does it have to be an activist? Why couldn't it just been trans people who are sick and tired of her being a transphobe?
Well, basically, I mean, accusations and threats. If people are giving her threats, that's not on, really.
No.
It's not on to threaten anybody.
No, sure.
Trans people tend to be the victim of threats all the time. I mean, you only have to look a little bit at the internet to see how many threats, and I mean threats of violence, threats of rape, threats that they're going to be killed, and so on, trans people face if they say anything on the internet.
Yeah.
I mean, it is disgusting. And I think most people who at all read comments and stuff like that know how incredibly disgusting it is. But I want to say it is not just Twitter bullying. The number of trans people who are killed, who, what I think the last Trans Day of Remembrance, there were about 700-800 people who had been killed that last year for being trans. And this is people who are clearly being killed because they are trans, not because a relationship went bad or in order to, as part of a robbery or any other sort of thing.
Crime.
It's pure hate crimes. And the people who compile those figures are actually very careful to make sure that they are issues that where the killing is only related to the fact that that person is trans. And that's 700 people.
And this is
in a
why,
year.
and this is why, people do react very badly to the likes of J.K. Rowling, who has a large following, is because it actually
and has incredible levels of privilege.
Yeah, that's right. Incredible. She's probably not a billionaire, is she? She's very, very wealthy. She's white and she's cisgendered, and so she's in.
And she has an audience. She has a platform.
She has a platform. That's
she
right.
has a blue tick on Twitter, and her comments will always come to the top, and newspapers will report her, and so on.
Yeah, that's right. And so, but the point I was making is that she, because she has such a big platform, she's feeding the transphobia, and of course everybody jumps on that bandwagon because they're the group to dump on at the moment. It used to be gay people, now LGBT people, now it's trans people. It's like once gay and lesbians manage to get to get marriage
lesbian
equality,
people tend to have a lot more rights and be seen in an inclusive way increasingly in society. Now, of course, that's people are attempting to wind that back, particularly in the United States, but other places as well. There is an international, effort to try and wind back a lot of LGBTI plus rights. And also, that same group of people, many of whom associated with religion and the family, are also attacking women's rights, the right to reproductive autonomy, the right to work, the right to, they attack basically a lot of progress that people have made against systemic discrimination.
I was just going to say though that they've become the flavour of the month. Transphobia has become the flavour of the month in Australia with the politicians and with the typical hate groups, and it's the same in the United States. But I was going to say that talking about talking about gay and lesbian people, just recently Donald Trump was talking about wanting to make it more difficult for gay and lesbians to adopt.
He wants to make it impossible for them to adopt.
That's during Pride.
The Pride Month.
Pride Month, yeah. So, but the point I didn't finish my thought about this was this transphobia leads to violence. That's all I was wanting to say was that the transphobia that she's putting out there eventually leads to violence, and you end up with 800 trans people dead in a year from hate crimes. So anyway, let's go on to this. Otherwise, we'll.
Okay. My point was that there is a concerted effort internationally, which can be called the culture wars, and trans people are seen as low-hanging fruit. They're an easy target because people are less comfortable with trans people these days than they are with gay and lesbian people. And they are less comfortable with gay and lesbian people than they are with women's rights. Internationally, there is an effort with the International Family Association and various other groups, religious groups, family-oriented groups, family values groups, and so on, to try and push a certain conservative agenda. And that's what partly is meant by the culture wars. And a lot of those, for trans people, about trans people, they're seen as low-hanging fruit. They hold debate in the marriage equality debate in Australia. They focused on trans people again and again and again because they were seen as an easy target. People are less comfortable with trans people than they are with gay and lesbian people. But this effort doesn't stop with trans people. Trans people are first cab off the rank because they're easy targets. And then gay and lesbian people are there, and you can see that with Donald Trump now. But reproductive rights are right there. Women in the workforce are right there. It doesn't stop. It's an attack on LGBTI people. It's an attack on women. You see there's also the attack on migrants and the attack on people of color. Basically, it's a kind of general xenophobia. And it's a xenophobia, cultural xenophobia. It's anybody who is different than the Betty Crocker, Leave It to Beaver ideal of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant cisgender heterosexuality.
But isn't that how it's supposed to be, Dee Dee?
Well, certainly it used to be supposed to be that way.
Okay.
It never was that way. But
Yeah. Yep. Oh, and and this is the thing too that J.K. Rowling seems to think that trans people have just suddenly come up and it's suddenly happened in this century, and that there's no existence of trans people, which there has been for, a couple of thousand years at least that we know of. Anyway,
in this highly charged context, she's been throwing out her transphobic tweets and then sits there and says, oh my goodness, people are arguing with me and attacking my points of view.
Yeah.
Oh my God, how unfair.
Yeah.
I mean, really.
Yeah. Anyway, well, let's go on with this. So,
sure.
All the time I've been researching and learning, accusations and threats from trans activists have been bubbling in my Twitter timeline. This was initially triggered by a when I started taking an interest in gender identity and transgender matters. I began screenshotting comments that interested me as a way of reminding myself what I might want to research later. On one occasion, I absently-minded liked instead of screenshotting. The single like was deemed evidence of wrongthink, and a persistent low level of harassment began. Months later, I compounded my accidental like crime by following Magdalene Burns on Twitter. Magdalene was an immensely brave young feminist and lesbian who was dying of an aggressive brain tumor. I followed her because I wanted to contact her directly, which I succeeded in doing. However, as Magdalene was a great believer in the importance of biological sex, and oh, what a surprise, and didn't believe lesbians should be called bigots for not dating trans women with penises, dots were joined in the heads of Twitter trans activists, and the level of social media abuse increased.
Okay, I have a few things to say about that.
Yeah.
First off, I mean, J.K. Rowling is known as a transphobe, so when she does these things, it doesn't come out of a vacuum. It's not, oh, I did one single like accidentally and suddenly they were all over me. No, I think she's been known to have these views for some time.
Yeah.
And the views are essentially transphobic.
Yeah.
She basically says trans people, she's basically invalidating them and saying their identities aren't real.
Yeah.
And here I'd like to say there is a difference. I mean, very few, I don't think any trans people believe that they are biologically a different sex than they were when they were born. They're very aware that their bodies or whatever are not the way that they would like them to be. The issue isn't biological. The issue is legal. Are they legally men or women? And you get people increasingly, I mean, I know it's very easy for a trans person to want to immediately go to, the young trans people who have transitioned in childhood and are indistinguishable from people of the gender they identify as. But they do, even those people realize that biologically they are not the same. But as far as anybody knows, and as far as people treat them in the street, and as far as anything that comes down on them, they're treated as the gender of their identity. And, it is not right to say that person is not that. When you say that person is not that, then you put that person at risk. Not only do you put them at risk, you make their whole existence be about that. In the legal thing that we were involved in, one of the cases was in Australia, if you go to work at 16, you must show a birth certificate to prove your age. It's not to prove your gender, it's to prove your age.
Yeah.
Now, if a young person couldn't change their birth certificate, they're immediately outed as trans. And that means very often they can't get a job, or they are heavily discriminated against. And often, once anyone knows, everyone knows. That's one of the problems with society. And for trans people, then all of their life becomes about the fact that they're trans instead of whether they are good at this or whether they're a good artist or a good policy officer or a good this or that. All of that vanishes.
Yeah.
And trans becomes the only issue.
Yeah, that's right. And this, I think she thinks that picking up on this woman, this woman who's a lesbian, somehow gives it more credence. That she's also against all of this. It doesn't give her. She just happens to be a woman who is a transphobe too.
Yeah. Well, it's like, and didn't believe lesbians should be called bigots for not dating trans women. Well, there's a lot of lesbians who do date trans women. There are lesbians who don't. There are lesbians who don't date black women.
Yeah.
There are lesbians who don't date all kinds of people. The issue is with that, and the thing a lot of people have made clear, and it's not about trans women with penises, it's about any trans woman, because the people who are transphobic don't care whether you have a penis or not.
Yeah.
And I'll also say, all of this is always about binary trans women. It's very infrequently about non-binary people or trans men, or if it is, it's an afterthought. The issue they have is trans women. And it doesn't matter whether they're pre-op or post-op. They hate trans women.
Yeah.
Either way.
Yeah.
And the thing is that if a lesbian has never dated a black woman, well, that's all right.
Yeah.
Because not everybody finds somebody that they like that is black, particularly in Australia.
Yeah.
But if they say, I would never date a black woman, that's racism.
Yeah.
Because you're not talking about an individual or individuals that you've met.
No.
You're talking about a whole group who you are rejecting, no matter who they are.
Yeah.
And the same is true with trans women.
Yeah.
I know, and I know you know, because we've talked about it. We've talked about it before. That we know lesbians who've been transphobic and all that kind of stuff, who a couple of years down the line end up with a partner who is a pre-op trans woman.
Yes.
Yes. And sometimes it's just meeting the right person. The thing is, when you come and say something
it's that
like,
thing methinks thou dost protest too much. They used to really protest about it all, and then suddenly you find down the track that they're dating. And by the way, you don't have to be have had the reassignment surgery to be still considered trans, do you, Dee Dee? You don't have to go through.
Of course not.
No. So so anyway, let's go on with this, shall we? Otherwise, we'll never finish it.
But my point is,
we're only on the third paragraph.
My point is, she's having a go at people who say that that's transphobic. To say I would not date a trans woman.
Yeah.
Well, many trans women have responded to that kind of thing and said, we're not saying you should date trans women or you must date trans women.
Yeah.
We're saying that when you say, I would never date a trans woman, that's like saying I would never date a black woman or an Asian woman or something like that.
Yeah, really.
And that is bigoted.
Yeah, really.
Because you're not talking about people anymore.
No, that's right.
You may have preferences, maybe you don't like people who are too thin or who are blonde or whatever.
Yeah.
But even so, preferences and bigotry are different. You might have preferences but meet somebody and find that they're actually fascinating, interesting people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And people quite frequently get together with people who don't meet all their preferences.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But to say, I would never date a black woman. That's bigotry.
Yeah.
To say I would never date a trans woman, that's bigotry.
Yeah. Anyway, so she goes, this paragraph is all about her being called different names because they were upset because she was killing trans people with her hate sort of thing, whatever, which is probably true. With transphobia leads to violence, which leads to the killing of trans women.
Yeah. Well, it certainly leads to an atmosphere in society where trans people are under threat, under social threat, under the threat of just not wanting to pretend that they're not trans.
Yes.
Wanting to pretend, which is a whole nother thing. Wanting to be stealth, as they say.
Yeah.
And then, of course, if a trans person does that in a defensive thing, they're called deceitful.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, and they can't win, basically.
No. Yes, basically these people in many ways just want them to just go away.
They want them to stop existing.
Yes, crawl under a rock and just go away. And I find this particularly cowardly that people join on that. It's like society always seems to need to have some group to hate. They take out their frustrations and everything out on other, and they do it over and over and over again. If it wasn't trans people, if that was cleared up, then it'd be some other group. It just goes from one sort of vulnerable group to the next. Anyway, so she said, what I didn't expect in the aftermath of my cancellation was the avalanche of emails and letters, yada, 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 yada.
Why
we won't
not?
go into
She
that.
had thousands and thousands of followers. Her bloody tweets are seen by millions of people.
Yeah. And
she
then,
doesn't expect to have responses.
Yeah.
Really?
And then she sort of said, and people were, these people that had the same views as she were very afraid of the blowback and all that kind of thing. Anyway, so she stepped back from Twitter. She's saying here, and then but she was saying how people were sort of afraid to speak up and support whatever she was saying or whatever. Anyway, so let's see.
It might not have been fear. It might have been they disagreed with her.
Yeah. So if you didn't already know and what you should and why should you, TERF, T-E-R-F, is an acronym coined by trans activists, which stands for trans exclusion.
This is her
this
thing.
is her. This is her thing. Yep. I'm continuing on her letter, which stands for trans exclusionary radical feminist. In practice, a huge and diverse cross-section of women are currently being called TERFs, and the vast majority have never been radical feminists. Examples
and aren't.
Examples of so-called TERFs range from the mother of a gay child who was afraid their child wanted to transition to escape homophobic bullying to a hitherto...
Now, I have to interrupt you.
Yeah, sure, no worries.
The idea that somebody would become transgender to escape gay discrimination.
Yeah, really.
Give me a bloody break.
Talk about jumping from the frying pan into the fire. You know what I mean?
Yes, into an inferno.
Yeah. That sounds like a... Anyway, so
I mean, that's ridiculous, given the levels of discrimination for the two groups.
Sure. To a hitherto totally... This is her continuing on. To a hitherto totally unfeminist older lady who's vowed never to visit Marks and Spencer's again because they're allowing any man who says their identity as a woman allowing any man who says they identify as a woman into the women's changing rooms. Ironically, radical feminists aren't even trans exclusionary. They include trans men in their feminism because they were born women.
Yes and no. There's an awful lot of them who don't. Basically, a lot of the transphobic women, as I said, they focus on trans women. In general, society focuses on trans women.
Yeah.
It doesn't pay that much attention to trans men.
No. It's part of the misogyny thing.
And it's part of the misogyny thing.
Yep.
I guess people can understand why a woman would want to be a man.
Really? Okay.
But for a man to become a woman, that might shake the foundations of patriarchy.
Yes, it breaks all kinds of things.
But in that, like one of the things, because trans activists will say to transphobic women, how come you keep picking on trans women?
Yeah.
What about trans men?
Yeah.
And so the new trans exclusionary whatever thing has been to say trans people are trying to extinguish lesbians by turning them all into trans men.
Oh, really?
Yes. There's this new narrative that they've thrown in to try and explain in a negative way trans men. They have to be negative, find some negative excuse.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what they do about non-binary people. They hate them too, but
yeah. I think I finished that paragraph. Anyway, so
about men going into women's changing rooms.
Yes, okay.
I think that's garbage. I don't think somebody from Marks and Spencer would allow somebody, if you're talking about somebody who's a trans person who is doing their very best to fulfill societal expectations of what a woman looks like. Well, I think that's one thing.
Yeah.
And if people, start having an issue about that, well, unfortunately, where people have had issues about trans women using bathrooms or trans women getting into the Michigan Women's Folk Festival, for example, and so on, well, first off, in terms of the bathroom thing, if a man wants to walk into a woman's bathroom, there's nothing stopping them, really.
No.
And sometimes they do that, and sometimes they've raped people. They don't need to pretend they're trans.
No.
And rapists don't pretend that they're trans.
No.
They don't need to. You look at statistics about rape, and the vast majority of rapes of women are being done by people that they know, either partners or friends or family, parents, and that kind of stuff. Close family members. And that's the majority of rape cases. And the ones that aren't people who they know are impulses, are people who do it on an impulse. And people who do it on an impulse don't pretend they're trans in order to rape somebody. It's just bullshit.
We were just
trans people are more likely to be raped, are more likely to be beaten up in a bathroom
and killed. So somebody just recently, a trans woman, was killed in a bathroom. It's more likely that she doesn't seem to mention that though.
No, she doesn't care.
No, and the thing is, we were just saying earlier, Didi, we were just saying earlier how we've got a little cat on our lap, and she's being very insistent. So, we were just saying how wouldn't it have been wonderful if J.K. Rowling, with all her hundreds of millions of dollars, had put energy into actually education programs for young boys to have education about this issue and
the toxic masculinity and rape culture.
Wouldn't that be great? Since there's epidemic levels of rape in the world of women and children, and and men, of course, are being raped as well. But I mean, the majority of rapes, far beyond, the majority are men raping women. That's it, really, isn't it?
And I have to say,
and they're often people that they know.
Trans people are seen often as an easy victim because they're less likely to make some sort of complaint. And it's like sex workers. Sex workers, people feel like they can rape and kill sex workers, and of course that's an epidemic. You look at what happens there, because basically the police don't do anything about it.
No. Oh, and the other thing is, I mean, the levels of domestic violence, they're skyrocketing, particularly during this COVID-19
that's just
thing.
Plain misogyny.
But why doesn't she put effort into that education? Because where did some men decide that their whole family, that they could kill their whole family because they're depressed about life? I mean, and that happens over and over and over again. Men killing their partners.
Because their partners won't
children.
put up with abuse or something and divorce, and so they kill their partners and their children.
And all their children, no matter what age. So anyway,
But that's a different issue. But really, I mean, why doesn't she look at, if she's concerned about rape?
No, but it's all based on misogyny and sexism.
Is. So why doesn't she try and address or support groups that are working to break down the gender norms for men, which are often toxic. And toxic, it doesn't mean men are toxic, it means it is toxic for men to behave like that.
And for those who are in various kinds of relationships.
In association with them,
So, I mean, that would be really sensible. But no, let's pick on a group that's already struggling, just trying to live. And
a very small group.
Yeah, very small group. Like, you'd swear that there was hundreds of millions of trans people. There's like a few million.
Taking over the world. Yes.
There's like a few million on the planet. I mean,
I don't know if there's that many.
There's probably not even that many. Exactly. Anyway,
and
on a planet of 7-something billion.
The point I wanted to make before is that with all of this bathroom things and Women's Michigan Folk Festival, what's ended up happening is people who try to police that end up policing women who are behaving in non-conventional ways,
Right.
who are often lesbians.
Yes.
Yeah, who look a bit too butch, a little too masculine. So they might be trans. So you better run them out of the bathroom.
Yeah.
Keep them out of the folk festival.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how could they prove that? Take down their pants? You're going to do panty checks?
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And people do want to do that.
Yeah, sure.
And it's disgusting.
Yeah.
It is the opposite of feminism.
Yeah, sure. So anyway, let's go on to the next paragraph. But I may have to make this into. I may just make this one long video. And for those who are interested in this issue, they'll probably stick with it, or maybe not. We may be kind of waffling too much, but we're trying to get through it. So, but accusations of this is J.K. Rowling again. Accusations of turfery have been sufficient to intimidate many people, institutions, and organisations I once admired, who are carrying before the tactics of the playground.
Oh, come now. I mean, there's a lot of organizations.
Can I just get through the paragraph?
Well, no, I want to stop right there.
Right, okay.
This business cowering before the tactics. Oh, yes, trans people are such bullies.
Yeah.
Yeah? Have you ever been on a playground? Have you noticed how trans people get treated on a playground? Literally?
Yeah.
How trans children get treated on a playground? Have you seen the suicide statistics for trans people, the number of trans people who spend a lot of time absent from school as a consequence of the kind of bullying they get? And it is not bullying by trans people. And these organizations, I think they're just involved. They just see the argument of social justice. I don't think all of these institutions that are turning away from transphobia are doing it because they're cowering. I think they're doing it because they understand morality and right and wrong.
Anyway, she's so I'll skip that. But the people who are watching this can read that one that I just had there. So she said, and J.K. Rowling said, "So why am I doing this? Why speak up? Why not quietly do my research and keep my head down? Well, I've got 5 reasons for being worried about the new trans activism and deciding I need to speak up." Yes, that terrible trans agenda. Okay, firstly, I have a charitable trust that focuses on alleviating social deprivation in Scotland with a particular emphasis on women and children. Among other things, my trust supports projects for female prisoners and for survivors of domestic and sexual abuse. Well, that's a good thing. I also fund medical research into MS, a disease that behaves very differently in men and women. It's been clear to me for a while that the new trans activism is having, or is likely to have, if all its demands are met, a significant impact on many of the causes I support, because it's pushing to erode the legal definition of sex and replace it with gender.
Okay, can I add something there?
Sure.
Now, as I say, trans people are very aware of the difference of their biology. And one of the things people talk about is the confusion it creates the medical profession. It doesn't create any confusion for medical professionals. Medical professionals generally know that a person is trans.
Yeah.
And they make the appropriate things. Trans women will be checked for prostate problems. Although generally they don't need to because they don't have any testosterone. Not always the case, but they may get into a situation where it's indicated medically. But trans women also need, if they are on hormones at all, have gone down that path, they need to have breast examinations because they're more subject to breast cancer, just like women. The thing is that in things like prisons and women's shelters and that sort of thing, they're already dealing with trans women. They all, even when the laws haven't caught up, they have to deal with the realities of the fact that if you have a trans woman who looks like a woman, and you put them in a male prison, what do you expect to happen? And when they do that and put them in a male prison, those expectations often come to pass. They are generally assaulted they are raped, and they may well be killed. A number of them are.
Yeah. Just recently, that Kuwaiti woman.
Recently, well, not too long ago, one happened in Tasmania,
Yeah.
where they put a trans woman into a men's prison. She was gang raped to the point where
She needed a colostomy.
She needed a colostomy bag. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she ended up killing herself.
Yeah. That's the...
And that's the reality of that.
Yeah.
And to sit there and make up some fear of oh, how will this impact,
Yeah.
And as far as MS, any doctor worth the name will be able to sort out that this person is male, this person is female, and if there's a difference genetically based on sex, that you would apply different things.
Yeah, really.
It's not going to have an impact.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. The second reason is that this is J.K. Rowling again.
The big problem people have medically, particularly the transphobes, is the fact that a trans man has a uterus and may get pregnant, and they can't stand that that person would not want to be called a woman.
Yeah.
And would still want access to pregnancy and family planning issues.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
And they can't stand that.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of real
Why can't they stand that?
Well, because it shatters their notion of femaleness somehow. I mean, it's really not a problem for family planning clinics.
No.
If a trans man needs a pap smear, it's not a problem for a family planning clinic to do that.
Yeah.
They just do that, and they're just polite, and they don't call them, she.
Yeah.
It isn't that hard.
Yeah. Talk about it's.
But they would think it's the end of the world.
Yeah. Much of
that they might have language which, says a person who has a baby instead of a woman who has a baby.
Yeah, right.
It's the end of the world. It's not the end of the world. If you're concerned with biology, well, it kind of confirms biology.
Yeah.
So,
Anyway, so...
But you also be polite to the person.
Yeah. So that she goes on to say, hang on, did I get the end of that? Yeah. The second reason is that I'm an ex-teacher and the founder of the children's charity, which gives me an interest in both education and safeguarding. Like many others, I have deep concerns about the effect that the trans rights movement is having on both.
What? That you might teach boys that they're not, boys are made of snips and snails and puppy dogs' tails, and it's right to dip girls' pigtails in the inkwells and harass them, and if you can get them in a corner, you pull up their skirt and rape them, and that's what a boy is. And girls, just have to put up with it because you need to be compliant and nice, Yeah. And you're concerned with that level of education? You want to teach people that there is no such thing as gay or lesbian, and if there is, it's some weird, perverted something or other. You want to teach people that there are no such thing as trans people, and, that this is some weird agenda that a small group has managed to push on the entire world. Yeah. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
What a load of codswallop.
Yeah.
If you're really concerned about education, you want to have all children included.
Yeah.
You want to reduce bullying.
She obviously doesn't care about trans children killing themselves because they feel so alienated.
Or gay and lesbian people being bullied, or other people being bullied. I don't know. Does she include,
does she include safeguarding, meaning safeguarding from gay and lesbian things? I think she's just talking about...
I think she's talking about safeguarding from gay and lesbian things.
Really?
Otherwise, how does it make any sense?
I don't know.
I mean, if you're worried that, gay and lesbian, agendas are going to make it unsafe for children, how is it going to make it unsafe for children? Because the gay and lesbian agenda basically says, hey, we're here, please acknowledge us. Don't teach people that we don't exist or that there's something wrong with it.
Yeah.
Please don't encourage kids or not discourage them to be bullies.
Yeah.
Please don't try and make us so different and weird that we become victims.
Yeah.
Because that is pretty much what the gay agenda in school is. The gay agenda is, let's be inclusive.
Yeah.
Let's be inclusive of everybody. And let me just say,
Yeah.
you know, if you are breaking down some of those gender norms,
Yeah.
that normative gender thing,
Yeah.
one of the impacts will be on people who are not transgender and maybe not gay and lesbian,
Yeah.
but who don't really fit those gender norms.
Yeah.
You know, the boy who's a bit quiet and thoughtful and creative,
Yeah.
the one who likes to read Harry Potter
Yes.
and daydream.
Yeah.
Now, those boys get picked on too,
Yeah,
because they're
sure.
not real boys.
Yeah.
You know, they're not
Enforcing-
out there throwing rocks and torturing animals.
Enforcing the patriarchy and the binary is very important
Yeah.
still in our society. It
Yeah.
really is. I mean, you only have to look at the representations in the media.
Yeah.
Still, even though they'll throw in some occasional differences and stuff, basically they keep pushing those same gender stereotypes that are constructed. Anyway, let's go on to this one. So the third is that.
Yeah, so she's worried that the transgender might break down some of those gender stereotypes and irrevocably damage children.
Yeah, yeah. So here we go. The third is that, as a much banned author,
Oh, yes.
I am interested in freedom of speech and have publicly defended it, even unto Donald Trump. And this is, by the way, the same woman who was bagging the Labor Party, Jeremy Corbyn's Labor Party, which was pushing for all kinds of social justice issues. She actually did her best to she actually jumped the Labor Party and started actually campaigning against him, like putting out stuff against
Yes.
social justice issues in the Labor Party. Anyway, so...
Anyway, I mean, I'll just sort of say, too, you know, if she's so interested in freedom of speech, what's her problem with trans people speaking up about transphobia?
Yeah, really.
I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
Really. Is it only one side?
Yeah, really. So,
And there's been a few people who've mentioned that.
all right.
Yeah.
So J.K. Rowling then goes on to say, the fourth is where things start to get truly personal. I'm concerned about the huge explosion in young women wishing to transition, and also about the increasing numbers who seem to be detransitioning. I don't actually believe that's true. Returning to their original sex, because they regret taking steps, they have, in some cases, altered their bodies irrevocably and taken away their fertility. Some say they decided to transition after realizing they were same-sex attracted, and that transitioning was partly driven by homophobia, either in society or in their families.
Well, that would be a good reason to try and work against homophobia.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
that's not a good reason to work against trans people. You know, that's a good reason to try and make women happy
Yeah.
to be themselves,
Yeah.
whether or not they're gay,
Yeah.
to accept lesbians. And this is a bit this thing, too, that they're saying, you know, it's lesbian erasure.
Yeah.
You know, they're taking all the lesbians and turning them into men. Well, you know, I'm sure there are some people who detransition. I think the percentage of people who detransition is less than 2%. I think it's significantly less than 2%, but it's certainly a low number.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't think anybody, certainly in the trans community, it's been the received wisdom for decades
Yeah.
that you don't do anything that you don't actually feel compelled to do internally.
Yeah.
That,
That's right.
You know, you don't need to do that. And I mean, here she's basically, you know, worried about trans women with penises. Well, okay, this kind of worry actually pushes trans women towards surgery.
Yes.
And if you are saying, unless you are almost identical to a binary woman, then you're bad, you're just not real.
Yeah.
Well, what kind of an impact do you think that's going to have?
Yeah.
So she's quite hypocritical here.
Yeah. Yeah.
If people are transitioning, I think because it is an option, more people are involved in that. But I think a lot of people are just sick to death of the gender binary.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the women, particularly, that I've noticed the increase in people who are assigned female at birth, who transition in some way.
Yeah.
A lot of those people transition as non-binary people. They basically just aren't interested in that female role that they're being thrown on. And if you really want to do something about that, start working against the patriarchy.
Yeah.
Start working against misogyny.
Yeah.
If you are worried that people are transitioning because of homophobia, work against homophobia.
Yeah, really.
Don't try and stop people from transitioning.
Yeah, really.
Because, honestly, the vast majority of people who transition are glad.
Yes.
Are much happier.
Yeah.
And
I mean, we've seen that during the campaign, haven't we?
Yeah.
We had a lot to do with, parents of parents of trans children, and the children were just so much happier. The parents were so much happier. I mean, she needs to really, instead of looking for the negatives and looking for the whatever, she should, this is the problem. People always want to confirm their biases, don't they?
Yeah.
They don't look for real, actually look into it. They want to find things that support that sort of phobia that they have.
Yeah.
And she sort of seems to think that she's holding the social fabric together by doing this. You know what I mean? Anyway,
but what social fabric is she holding together?
I know. It's
is
really.
she trying to hold together the Donald Trump one?
Yeah.
Because she clearly didn't want the Jeremy Corbyn one.
No. Exactly.
Yes, and I mean, that whole argument about freedom of speech, I have to say, whenever I hear that, I'm reminded that this is a refrain you hear again and again and again from the alt-right.
Yeah.
We want our freedom of speech to be bigots. We want our freedom of speech to call black people names.
Yeah.
We want our freedom of speech to call women bitches.
And the evangelical Christians also carry on about freedom of speech because they want the freedom, religious freedom they call it, to be bigots.
Yeah.
So anyway, but we should probably go on to this next paragraph because we'll never get through it. Didi? Okay, so most people probably aren't aware.
Well, it's a lot of garbage to unpack.
Yeah, sure. J.K. Rowling then goes on to say, most people probably aren't aware, I certainly wasn't until I started researching the issue properly, I'm having trouble reading tonight, that 10 years ago the majority of people wanting to transition to the opposite sex were male. The ratio has now reversed. The UK has experienced a 4,400% increase in girls being referred to transitioning treatment. Autistic girls are hugely overrepresented in their numbers.
Okay, a few things there. I mean, I think those statistics are pretty much true. There have been a lot of men who transitioned in the older framework. I think partly that was because medicalization focused on that. Mm-hmm. And also because trans women tended to be kind of more desperate and socially less acceptable. And if they could transition, this is the older framework for transgender women particularly. Mm-hmm. If they could transition, then they could fit into society more easily. Because being a sissy and a cross-dresser and stuff was horrible. Whereas being a butch dyke wasn't so bad. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of women felt like, well, I knew a lot of butch dykes, and you got what people call boys.
And we're using the reclaimed.
BLI.
We're reclaiming that word, by the way. We belong to the LGBT community, and we have a right to use that word, dyke. Just for anybody who finds that word offensive, we're reclaiming a word that's used as a slur.
An insult.
Okay, so I just want to clarify that.
But it is like the dyke pride parades and the dykes on bikes
and all of that.
And if you have a problem with lesbians calling themselves dykes, go talk to the dyke on bike and tell them your problem.
Yeah, okay, so sorry to interrupt, go on.
Okay, but in the lesbian community, there were tranny boy dykes, and there were boys, BOI, and there were very butch dykes, very butch women. And there was a lot more scope to be that. I don't think there was a lot of scope for people who were assigned male at birth. I mean, your only option really was to be a drag queen or a sex worker of some sort. Yeah. And so transition was kind of a way out of that for a lot of people. And I think as more and more people transitioned, women who felt like that would actually make them more comfortable, started to see that that was actually an option. And I think this is partly what it is. And I'd say partly it is due to misogyny. I mean, women get the shit end of the stick, and why wouldn't you, if particularly if you feel, I don't know any women who do you know any women who would have wanted to transition solely for social reasons or economic reasons? I can't think of any. I mean, every trans man that I've met is a trans man because that's how they feel they are. Yeah. It's not about economics. It's not about social differential.
No.
Yeah, it's about how they feel about themselves.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, and autistic girls are hugely misrepresented in numbers. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, autism is another of those things. I mean,
let's not get into that right now.
Well, I'll just say, 20 years ago, how many people were seen as being in the autistic spectrum?
Yeah.
The number of people seen on the autistic spectrum has exploded far more so than the number of people who are trans.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's true. And that's probably because it's more, this is more recognized as, and there's more research done into it. Yeah. Anyway, but I think
there's a lot of autistic women who are not trans.
Sure. Yeah. So anyway, let's get on to the next paragraph. So J.K. Rowling goes on to say, the same phenomenon has been seen in the U.S. in 2018. American physician and researcher Lisa Littman set out to explore it. In an interview, she said, parents online were describing a very unusual pattern of transgender identification where multiple friends and even entire friend groups became transgender identified at the same time. I would have been remiss had I not considered social contagion and peer influences as potential factors, end quote.
Yeah. Let's all become trans together.
Because it's so much. Because it's so much fun. It's so much fun, and society just loves trans people.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, so J.K. Rowling continues.
Okay, this is actually a line that people come up with. The transgender things.
Oh yeah.
And
we should talk about just put people on to Natalie Wynn from ContraPoints on YouTube. She does some very interesting videos on trans issues, her being a trans woman, and I don't know if you'd call her an activist really, but anyway, she's a YouTuber who has really good videos. Fun. She's good. So anyway, I'll go on. So J.K. Rowling.
Cat Black is really
Cat Black is good too. It's Katblaqe, Cat Black on YouTube. She's a black trans woman. Okay, so J.K. Rowling goes on. Littman mentioned Tumblr, Reddit, Instagram, and YouTube as contributing factors to rapid onset gender dysphoria, where she believes that in the realm of transgender identification, youth have created particularly insular echo chambers, end quote. I don't know, there's something about her.
Yeah. This is a bunch of, Reddit and Tumblr and 4chan and stuff coming up with these things. Rapid onset. This is something that transphobic women have kind of almost invented. Yeah. Rapid onset gender dysphoria. Yeah. And it's this rapid onset gender dysphoria, comes out of Tumblr and Reddit and 4chan and all these transphobic groups. Yeah. And I think it's something that particularly transphobic women have jumped on to try, and I think it's basically a fabrication. It's another argument. It's like the men pretending to be or claiming that they're transgender so they can walk into any woman's space. Yeah. I'll tell you, if somebody who was aggressively male and looked that way and said that they were a trans woman walked into a gym or a women's bathroom or shower room or anything that trans women were in, those trans women would probably tell them to get the fuck out.
Yeah.
Because it's bullshit.
You know what I find interesting? Here they are worried about this.
Yeah.
What about all the sort of the stereotypes, the gender stereotypes that are causing so much violence and also causing women to be these yo-yo sort of body dysphoria. Is that the word, body dysphoria?
Yeah.
About themselves constantly, and the mainstream media putting on them, they have to look this way and that way. That's still going on. I mean, the sort of damage that's doing to young people. What about all of that? And here they're worried about rapid onset gender dysphoria, like as if it's a contagion. They use the word contagion. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's that's sort of, it's almost like they think it's some sort of a propaganda put out by the transgender people to destroy the social fabric of society. I mean, that's how insane this sort of is.
Well, I think in part, some of the gender roles are unraveling.
Yes.
Thank God.
Thank goodness, yeah.
Thank God.
Because they're really destructive.
Because a lot of them are incredibly destructive.
Yeah, really.
The ones about men are incredibly bad for the men. I mean, imagine being told that you're not supposed to be emotional and that you're supposed to, be tough all the time. You're not supposed to, show pain, and you're not supposed to, and on the other hand, you can be violent, and anger is the one okay way to express your emotion.
And it's good to be an alpha male because you have to be bossy and dominant and tell everybody what to do. All those things are actually pushed.
I mean, look at the notion even of alpha male. Who is an alpha male? An alpha male is some big, strong, generally violent guy who can beat the crap out of everybody and force them to do what they want. I mean, that's almost the definition of what an alpha male is.
Yeah, something to aspire to.
And that's something to aspire to. It's an insane thing. And then look at the ideas of what, feminism has done a hell of a lot of good work breaking down the notions of what women are supposed to be. Women can be anything. And thank God, women can wear almost any kind of clothes these days. I mean, there's still men in skirts.
Really. Anyway.
But I mean, women wear anything, and this is a great thing. And women don't necessarily put up. They don't need a man for a breadwinner. They don't need a man for protection. They don't need a man for security. All of that stuff, that's feminism. And these are ways that the gender roles have been being broken down. And feminism has been doing a hell of a lot of that work. So for these people to call themselves feminists is just, ironic.
Anyway, so J.K. Rowling goes on to say her paper caused a furor. She was accused of bias and of spreading misinformation about transgender people, subjected to a tsunami of abuse and a concerted campaign to discredit both her and her work. The journal took the paper offline and re-reviewed it before republishing it. However, her career took a similar hit to that suffered by Maya Forstater. Lisa Littman had dared challenge one of the central tenets of trans activism, which is that a person's gender identity is innate, like sexual orientation. Nobody, the activists insisted, could ever be persuaded into being trans.
Yeah, well, people can't be persuaded really into being trans. I mean, I suppose that's not quite true. I mean, I suppose with sufficient indoctrination and torture, I mean, people are forced into weird things by religion. I mean, really weird notions. So I suppose it's possible, but I don't think there's anything in society that supports the notion of trying to convince people that they're trans. I mean, quite the opposite.
Yes, really.
And the fact that this person published a paper, well, you get people like from Canada.
Oh, yeah.
Peterson. Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
You get people like Jordan Peterson, who've made, their name and their fortune out of attacking political correctness and demanding the right to be rude to people.
Yeah.
And not only to be rude to people, but to be abusive to your students.
Yeah.
When you're in a position of power as a professor.
Yeah.
Now, there's also people who go online and publish papers saying climate change is nonsense.
Yeah.
The fact that somebody's published a paper doesn't mean a whole lot.
No.
In science and in social sciences and so on, it is not one person publishing something. It has to be seen as valid by their respective community.
Yeah.
And I think the reason that this paper was questioned was because there were a lot of people within that community who questioned it.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about other academics in their field.
Yeah, I noticed that she sort of implies that there's a sort of this big kind of the trans agenda, that there's a trans agenda, there's a plot, that runs through the theme of this explanation.
Yes, and that they're trying to stop the word from getting out. They're trying to stop these voices.
Yeah.
I mean, for her to be talking about being silenced.
Yeah,
I mean,
really.
J.K. Rowling has a platform that most trans people could only dream of.
Yeah, really. Yeah, totally. Anyway, so J.K. Rowling goes on to say, the argument of many current trans activists is that if you don't let a gender dysphoric teenager transition, they will kill themselves. In an article explaining why he resigned from the Tavistock and NHS Gender Clinic in England, psychiatrist Marcus Evans stated that claims that children will kill themselves if not permitted to transition do not, quote, align substantially with any robust data or studies in the area, nor do they align with the cases I have encountered over decades as a psychotherapist, end quote.
Okay, well, I mean, trans people, I think the evidence is that trans people's level of suicide is higher than almost any other group. You can say that it isn't because they were denied transition. I think certainly just because they are denied transition doesn't mean a person will kill themselves. But certainly a number of people have killed themselves as a consequence of that or of being afraid to even, open that door, about transition. I mean, as somebody who was involved with trans people in the 80s and earlier, it was a pretty common story for people who were trans to say that the decision to become trans, to take some sort of action to actually try and transition, came about when they found themselves in a car aiming at a tree or a power pylon or hitting the place where they felt like they just couldn't go on. And if they had to, they would rather just slit their wrists.
That's not an uncommon story, is it?
And that was not an uncommon story. Certainly, I'm saying that was not an uncommon story in the 80s. And that it was only that level of pain that brought somebody to the point where they would go through the incredible medical and financial and social burden of transition and living as a trans person. I mean, they'd have to go through years of going to psychiatrists and seeing doctors and trying to get approvals and meeting all kinds of criteria. And it would cost thousands and thousands, literally like $50,000, $100,000 or something to transition. and it was something they would have to do themselves.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, they may be rejected by everybody, by their family,
Yeah.
they would lose their job. They may never work again in their chosen field. They may become a social laughingstock. Well, all of that is true.
Yeah.
And yet
People still do
the
it.
alternative
Yeah.
was to just end their life.
That's right. So they're willing to put themselves through all of that.
And one of the speculations was they wondered how many people who did end their life were actually, trans.
Yes,
And
exactly.
did it because they decided they couldn't go through that.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll never know how many people.
We will never know how many people.
No, exactly. Yeah. Just hold on a second.
Well, that was really the case, like 30 years ago. I'm not sure that there's still that, situation where people need to get to the point of it's either life or death before they transition.
Yeah.
And this is a good thing.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot more people who see it as a real option, as an option that isn't the end of their life
Yes.
as they know it.
Yes.
Particularly for young people, and I think that's fabulous.
Yes,
I think
really.
this is something that older trans people who've had to deal with, all of that horrible difficulty in transitioning have tried to do.
Yeah.
Particularly to try and help very young trans people
Yeah.
who know that they're trans,
Yeah.
and it is important for them to know that they're trans,
Yeah.
to avoid going through all of the physical changes
Yeah.
that then have to be addressed. And if they can't be undone, those are often things that cost thousands of dollars to try
Yeah.
and undo. And then there are things that can never be undone.
Yes.
It's like the classic trope, the classic image of a trans woman is somebody who doesn't look very much like a woman.
Yes.
Who is clearly trans. And partly the media is responsible for this.
Yes.
Because they will choose, if they've got a number of people who are trans, who they could use as spokespeople, quite often they will find somebody who fits that image.
Yes.
Because that's what a trans person really looks like.
Yes, they want them. They want to
be
present them.
clearly trans,
Yes, yes.
which means not passable.
Yes. Yes.
Now,
we put that in.
passable is a whole other thing.
We put that in quotes. The word passable.
Passable, yes. Passable is a whole other thing, and it shouldn't depend on any of that.
No.
My own notion of gender is that we really need to deconstruct it
Yes.
to the point where it is purely personal information, personal feelings, just like the way we wear our hair or our eye color.
Yes.
That this is not the important thing about us.
Yes.
And that it is all just, human options.
Yeah.
That it isn't,
And capitalism is tied very much into the gender, this binary gender, because they like men to,
men are involved in production and women in reproduction is the way it's often been described.
And also the powers that be want men to still be have a violent streak in them because they can then be fodder for their constant imperialist
machines.
wars. So they want men to continue on like that.
Well,
and the beauty and beauty industry and the whole the billions and billions of dollars made off dieting and off makeup and all that kind of stuff, they want women to keep into consumption. Yeah, into consumption. So it's all about, the capitalist model just sort of really wants that binary in a way. Unless, of course, they can find, when they find more things that they can make money out of and it involves gender diversity, then they'll probably start, that will lose.
They do. It's another market.
Yeah, it's another market.
It doesn't mean that they end the market for beauty and feminine insecurity
and weight loss
and diet and all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, because women are such great consumers of all that stuff. But if you can do androgynous fashion.
Yeah, sure.
Woohoo! It's a whole nother market. It's a whole nother thing.
And they're also
appeal
they've
to
been
a
open.
younger market who have more money and.
What they're getting men more into, beauty products and, as well as the health and muscle fitness type stuff. And, whatever market they can, whatever niche they can exploit.
Bicep implants, calf implants, plastic surgery for men, to make them look more muscular and have that six pack. And all that
So whatever niche that
But
capitalism.
I just wanted to go back into that notion of production and reproduction. And one of the basic capitalist things within a Marxian framework, men were involved in production and women in reproduction, not just in the sense of having children, but in reproducing the social conditions that allowed men to keep working.
Right.
Yeah. So that's why it was important for women to be running the home and doing all those sort of things, to be doing the laundry, doing the dishes, doing the cooking. It allowed men, it freed men up for working. Yeah. And it reproduced the situation of exploitation of labor.
Yeah, but during the war, though, they were quite happy for women to just go in and make munitions.
But
and
just
all
went
of that.
show Wilma the Welder and Rosie the Riveter and all of those.
Anyway, we should get on to the next paragraph here. So J.K. Rowling continues, the writings of young trans men... Oh, have I already done that?
Haven't.
No, the writings of young trans men reveal a group of notably sensitive and clever people. The more of their accounts of gender dysphoria I've read, with the insightful descriptions of anxiety, dissociation, eating disorders, self-harm and self-hatred, the more I've wondered whether, if I'd been born 30 years later, I too might have tried to transition. Oh, God. The allure of escaping womanhood would have been so huge. I struggled with severe OCD as a teenager. If I'd found community and sympathy online that I couldn't find in my immediate environment, I believe I could have been persuaded to turn myself into the son my father had openly said he'd have preferred. Oh, geez, that is such a...
That might be her problem.
Yes,
but, I mean,
exactly.
She needs to deal with her therapist with it.
Yes. That says a lot, doesn't it?
And it certainly is no reason...
That says a lot, don't you think? That paragraph says a lot about her. Because, just if I can for a moment, I don't know how old she is. I think I might even be older than her, I think.
Yeah, I think you might be.
Yeah, I'm 59 this year. I mean... my experience, I don't think my parents were entirely happy that I wasn't the heterosexual, typical, person, heterosexual girl that they were hoping that I would be. And they probably also wanted me to look differently because I didn't, dress in dresses and stuff. This is in the 60s, 70s, 80s, etc. So, I mean, but that didn't make me want to then become a trans like a trans man, because they weren't happy with my presentation as a woman. Now, I don't know if they weren't happy, but I imagine just because they're much older parents than, because, I was adopted and they were about 40 years older than me, they probably were hoping for...
Father was 50 years older, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, I'm 47. He was 47. My mother was about 43 when they adopted me and my sister. But that didn't certainly make me think, well, I want to be that says a lot about her.
Yeah,
I think, and that's really kind of sad if she was anyway. But let's move. Do you have something to say about that?
I would have thought it might give her a little bit of empathy.
Sure. Yes.
And some understanding of why some people might do that. But I really do think that we gave a shout out before to Kat Black and ContraPoint's Natalie Wynn.
Natalie Wynn.
Jamie Dodger is a really good person to on YouTube.
Yeah.
Who's a trans man.
Is that Dodger? Jamie Dodger?
Dodger,
yeah. Okay. Well, that's somebody, and I'll link to that person. I'm not familiar with that one, but I know ContraPoints and Kat Black now.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a lot of Kat Blacks, but I'm sure that, you've said she's very good. And
she's
also philosophy.
Fun. She's not as political as
ContraPoints.
As Natalie.
And Philosophy Tube is good too. That
Philosophy Tube. Oliver Thorne is
Oliver
very good.
Thorne and the
he's
other
not
fellow
trans, but he's trans friendly.
Yeah, and who's the other fellow?
Harris Brewer.
H Bomber.
H
Bomber. That's HBOMBER. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. So
H Bomber guy.
H Bomber guy. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so. So J.K. Rowling goes on to say, when I read about the theory of gender identity, I remember how mentally sexless I felt in youth. I remember Collette's description of herself as a, quote, mental hermaphrodite, end quote, and Simone de Beauvoir's words, quote, it is perfectly natural for the future woman to feel indignant at the limitations posed upon her by her sex. The real question is not why she should reject them. The problem is rather to understand why she accepts them, end quote. So that's, what would you like to say?
Well, okay, but that is basic feminism. I mean, women have questioned why should they accept them and said that we shouldn't, and said that, well, fine, but these gender roles don't serve us in any real way at all. They're limitations. They are part of patriarchy. They're a structural way of holding women down. And feminism, for that reason, has been working for decades to break down, if not, centuries, to break down the male patriarchal roles and female patriarchal roles that say women can't do these things, that women can't own property, that women can't go to school, they can't go to university, they can't be doctors, they can't do this, they can't do that. I mean,
it sounds like she has a few issues that she needs to work out.
It sounds like she has some issues she needs to work out.
Which is not surprising, because usually people who are vehemently transphobic usually do have issues of some kind.
What I find interesting, as much as she sort of makes out that there's this vast organization that's trying to repress the many, many people who really are uncomfortable about trans people. During that campaign, we found there was basically 2 women who made a campaign. They were, Women Speak Tasmania. And they were out there every day trying to, stop trans people by any means necessary. Putting up rude posters and going out and handing out leaflets and all this sort of stuff, writing innumerable articles, getting put but really there were only 2 of them, and I think they ended up having maybe 4 or 5 followers.
And they ended up getting a man to speak for them in Parliament, which made ironic. That really funny. They call Women Speak a transphobic group of 2 with a man speaking. Anyway, so let's go on to the next next one. So, quote, so J.K. Rowling goes on, as I didn't have a realistic possibility of becoming a man back in the 1980s. Wow, this is really getting interesting.
I want to say something here. Women have had the possibility of becoming man for ages. If you look back, people have done history of people who have transitioned, more or less, obviously not surgically, but transitioned and lived as the other gender in the past. And almost all of those people are people who were assigned female at birth, living as men. There's numbers of people in Sydney, people in Tasmania, people all around the world, women who ended up acting as men and fighting in the Civil War in the United States. All of these examples, I'd say 85, 90% of them are actually women living as men.
Yeah, sure.
And so you have to really question this idea whether this is a new thing for women to be. It may be a new thing for women to transition as trans people. But it's certainly not a new thing for women to be identified to identify as men and live as men.
And this isn't a new thing. I mean, look at the Two-Spirit, the indigenous tribes in. Well, you might want to say something.
Trans people have existed always. And a lot of cultures have
celebrated.
Well, celebrated, have certainly included them as an option, as part of society. Whether they have been seen favorably, sometimes they have, or unfavorably, sometimes they have. They've been included in a lot of cultures other than Western Anglo culture.
Yes, I mean, this is very Western-centric, isn't it?
It's very Western-centric.
So, but it's interesting to me. She's actually revealing quite a lot about her own struggle with her own gender identity. And I think this is why this is freaking her out so much, because she obviously has issues that she hasn't really.
She obviously has issues, and obviously, I don't know to what degree this is rhetorical. I mean, as I didn't have the realistic possibility of becoming a man in the 80s.
Yeah.
It had to be books and music but did she actually want to
Yes,
be a man?
exactly.
Or did she just want to
Yes,
be
I was gonna say that.
limited
Yes.
by the gender stereotypes of woman?
Bingo. So that's what I was
think
thinking.
That's two different things. I mean,
Yes.
I'm reminded of this fellow who was talking to me, and he said, I'm worried that I might be trans. And I said, well, why? And he said, well, I'm very into communication, and I'm very empathic, and I'm very, compassionate, and I have all of these female qualities.
Right. Oh, God.
And I said, well, do you see yourself as female? And he said, well, no. I said, you're not trans, and what you need to do is stop calling these things female qualities. They're human qualities.
Exactly.
Everybody has some level of compassion.
Yes.
Everybody has the ability to
But isn't that tragic, though, that he thinks that they're female qualities, and, that he was looking
and he
at
was
them.
worried this might mean he was trans.
Yeah. How sad
my
is that?
God,
Yeah.
well, this is a problem, but it's a problem with expectation and these notions of what is female and male. They're just human traits.
I mean, if you're trans, you really know you're trans.
If you're trans, you know you're a trans.
You know you're trans,
yeah.
and you know it. Some people know it from way early, don't they, Didi?
Yeah.
Before they even sort of have a word for it, they know there's something happening.
Well, yeah, they know how they feel.
Yes.
And it's usually when people start telling them that that's not the way to be.
Yes.
That they realize that, but I am that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do you mean it's not? You mean I have to suppress this bit of me, and I have to suppress that bit of me? I mean, for people who aren't trans, there's no problem.
Yes.
And most people aren't trans.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of,
there may be problems with what they're fed.
Yes.
In terms of gender norms.
Yeah.
But they're not trans.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of, how we were saying, in the 80s. I mean, when I was at school, the options at my high school for what women were going to do after they left school was either to be a nurse, and sometimes a doctor if you were really smart, or to be a secretary.
Yeah.
They were the two things.
Or a teacher.
A teacher, yeah. So, I mean, we had very limited, and that's what they would push you towards at my high school in the 60s and 70s. Or a housewife. Exactly. In fact, when in grade 8, they were actually teaching mothercraft, how to be a mother. That was what they focused on. And also sewing and cooking. That's what we were taught. So that's what my experience...
In the school I went to, I mean, women got home economics and boys got shop.
And guess what I went into? I went into nursing because that's what everybody kind of pushed me towards. And I mean, I probably, if I'd been born, 30 years later, I probably would have done something else. Not that nursing wasn't a good thing to do. I'm glad I did it, but there were other things that I am interested in life and were interested in, but I actually ended up doing that. Anyway, let's go on to this. So I think that she sort of sees that, the whole being a man there was a lot more power involved in it. You had more power, you had more options.
Yeah.
And that's sort of, she's confusing that with people being trans.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Oh, yeah. I mean, here, she's obviously younger than you because she's talking about, in the 80s.
Yeah, sure. Well, it depends how old she was in the 80s. Anyway, so it says it had to be books and music that got me through both this is her speaking.
Well, I think this was when she was in her teens or whatever.
Right,
so.
Both my mental health issues and the sexualized scrutiny and judgment that set so many girls to war against their bodies in their teens. Fortunately for me, she says, I found my own sense of otherness and my ambivalence about being a woman. Reflected in the work of female writers and musicians who reassured me that, in spite of everything a sexist world tries to throw at the female-bodied, it's fine not to feel pink, frilly, and compliant inside your own head. It's okay to feel confused, dark, both sexual and non-sexual, unsure of what or who we are.
And why does she want to deny that to trans people?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's very heterosexist, really, isn't it? Do you think? Would you say heteronormative? Heteronormative?
I don't think it's heteronormative what she's saying there. I mean, she's saying otherness and that she feels other and is unsure of what she is, confused both sexual and non-sexual. Well, I think that's questioning.
But what does she mean she's confused with what she is? What is that?
Well,
she
it's
knows
okay to feel
she thinks she's a
confused,
woman.
dark, both sexual and non-sexual.
No, I was talking about she's not confused whether she's a woman or not, is she?
No. Well, I mean, the thing is, you can be confused.
Whatever that means.
About how you are a woman.
Yeah.
But that, cisgendered people are not confused that they are women.
Yeah.
It's trans people
Yes.
who have a huge issue. And I mean, I think this is really very difficult for cisgendered people to understand.
Yes.
What it is actually like to feel that is wrong. Mm-hmm. That not the roles that you are being put in is wrong, but that very essential nature is wrong.
Yeah.
Now, that could be seen as being a bit of a binary trans person's point of view. I'm not sure how non-binary people would frame that, but I think one of the great things about non-binary stuff, and I think that's non-binary people are fabulous, is that they really are saying, we're not interested in any of this.
Yeah.
Like, we don't want to be this and we don't want to be that.
Yeah.
We just want to be.
Yes, exactly. Be however we are.
We want to just have the freedom to not be bound by all of this.
I would have thought this was great when I was at school, because I didn't know one person. Of course, I'm sure there were, but I felt completely. I realized at some point that I was different to other people,
Sure.
meaning same-sex attracted. I didn't know anybody, because nobody's going to say anything, right?
Yeah.
But you realize at some point that it's not acceptable.
Yeah.
It's just this. It's never represented anywhere in the media or anywhere else. And then then you realize that it's just something that is under the...
And nobody even has to say it.
No, nobody has to say it.
It's so
you
prevalent
just know
in
that.
society
and
that
That's right. And I never thought there was anything wrong with me. Anyway, let's get on to this. Next one. So
I don't think what she's saying is necessarily heteronormative.
No, it's not. No, it's not. What I meant was that it was very... I don't think she was saying that she was confused about whether she was cisgendered or not.
No.
I didn't mean hetero. That's the wrong word to use.
Yeah.
Okay, so J.K. Rowling went on, I want to be very clear here. I know transition will be a solution for some gender dysphoric people, although I'm not aware through extensive research that studies have consistently shown that between 60 to 90% of gender dysphoric teens will grow out of their dysphoria. Again and again, I've been told to quote...
I think that's nonsense. That's utter rubbish.
Okay, just wait a minute. Again and again, I've just been told to, quote, just meet some trans people, end quote. I have. In addition to a few younger people who were all adorable, I happen to know a self-described transsexual woman who's older than I am and wonderful. Although she's open about her past as a gay man, I've always found it hard to think of her as anything other than a woman, and I believe and certainly hope she's completely happy to have transitioned. Being older, though, she went through a long and rigorous process of evaluation, psychotherapy, and stage transformation. The current explosion of trans activism is urging a removal of almost all the robust systems through which candidates for sex reassignment were once required to pass. A man who intends to have no surgery and take no hormones may now secure himself a gender recognition certificate and be a woman in the sight of the law. Many people aren't aware of this. Okay, so...
Now, you were holding me back.
Okay, but I want to finish that because this will be the longest podcast episode.
Yes.
So I'm trying not to make it too long. Okay, go on.
Okay, I find that really interesting, that the bit where she said, I've always found it hard to think of her as anything other than a woman. Okay, but when she sits there and says, biological sex is the only thing that matters... She's basically invalidating that person, that so-called friend of hers, and saying she is a man.
Yeah.
I've always found it hard to think of her as anything other than a woman, but she is a man, is what she ends up saying.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that would be kind of
really
horrible, terrible
for that
woman.
Yeah, for that woman. Yeah.
And she may say, well, I don't feel that way about you. But that's kind of like saying black people are awful, but you're all right. I know
nice.
you.
Yes.
You're a nice one.
I know, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking, geez,
and I
Louise.
think, yeah, I mean, I've heard racists say things like that.
I have a black friend.
I have a black friend, and he's all right.
Yes. Yeah.
But the black people I actually know, they're okay. But black people are bad. And all this kind of stuff. I think it's the same sort of thing when people talk about, I have a friend who all the black people I know, they're all right. But black people, there's something wrong with. Yeah. And that kind of racism, it penetrates everywhere, and it doesn't matter whether it's, Asian people, Chinese people. Yeah. One of the great fears these days with coronavirus.
Yeah.
Or Native American people.
Yeah.
She goes into this thing, and it's basically denying, although she is elsewhere denying the reality of that person, she says it's hard to think of them as anything other than a woman. Well, what trans people are actually after is the legal recognition. She goes through, she went through a long and rigorous process of evaluation, psychotherapy, and stage transformation. Well, it's not exactly like that. The old Harry Benjamin codes were the person had to immediately start living as the gender of their identity before they were allowed to have any kind of hormones.
Yeah.
And had to see a psychiatrist for a period of at least 2 years before they were allowed to get anything. And that psychiatrist was what trans people called a gatekeeper.
Yeah.
That you had to satisfy that person that you were being a woman in their opinion. And the number of horror stories about, people being told that they wouldn't be given permission to transition because they were wearing a pair of women's slacks instead of a dress.
Yeah.
And because they were wearing, flats instead of high heels.
Yeah.
And they weren't wearing enough makeup. I mean, it's hideous, the amount of expectation of female tropes that was put on people.
Yeah.
And the level of testing and gatekeeping that went on.
Yeah.
And trans people have written heaps about this and about how horrible that was. And the move away from that was because of that medicalized assessment thing being so awful and often so unjust. I mean, I've known trans women who said, like they were denied a letter unless they were wearing a dress and stuff like that. They were told, they weren't serious about their transition if they weren't wearing a dress and makeup whenever they came to visit their psychiatrist.
Yeah.
And yet when they went for transition, they actually went to Thailand. This was somebody that I knew.
Yeah.
I went with them to the airport, and they said, "Do you notice anything?" And I said, "What?" Of course, I notice a lot of things, but she said, "In this entire, area of the airport, I am the only woman wearing a dress."
Yeah, really.
And that's how ridiculous a lot of that stuff was.
Yes.
And so there's been a big push to eliminate a lot of that stuff. There's also been that thing that if you want any kind of recognition, you must have surgery.
Yes.
You cannot be recognized. I mean, this was what some of the legal changes we did. You could not be legally recognized here as the gender of your identity unless you had surgery. And not just any surgery, but surgery to your genitals. It was the only way you could have any recognition. And if you didn't have recognition, then of course, you were outed all the time, everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't so bad in Australia because thankfully they took off the gender markers on driver's licenses.
Yes.
Hallelujah. And they'd taken it off for 10 years. Nobody even noticed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway,
Yes.
we won't get into that argument again.
So
but I mean, so I find it interesting. She's using that period as the ideal and the current explosion of trans activism and removal of all the robust. It wasn't robust.
No.
It was coercive.
Yes.
It was abusive
Yes.
a lot of the time.
Yes. And it was nonsense too.
And it was nonsense.
Yeah.
It was coercive. It was abusive. It was not good.
Yeah.
It was forcing people into surgery if they wanted any kind of recognition.
Yes.
Really, I mean, Natalie Wynn
ContraPoints.
in ContraPoints
Yeah.
had a really good kind of breakdown. She said, you know, like, it's really about how society sees you.
Yeah.
You know, she isn't such a supporter of the notion of identity alone.
Yeah.
You have to make some kind of an effort to be seen that way. She talks about it in terms of Judith Butler's performativity, that you have to in some way be performing your gender.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean performing your gender according to, you know, the main gender tropes.
Yeah.
But it means you have to do something to indicate,
Yes.
you know, that you are some kind of woman. You know, you have to, you know, like, you might be a very butch dyke, but you know, women are very butch dyke, so that fits that description. But that's different than being a man. Yeah, that you have to perform that in some way.
Yeah. It's unfortunate, though, that anybody has to perform anything to be...
this is just the notion of,
Yes, sure.
of gender always being some sort of performativity.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that this is the way people understand gender at all.
See. Yep, yep.
And it's not meant to be. I mean, Judith Butler is an opponent of rigid gender roles.
Sure. Yep, yep. Yeah. Anyway, so what do you think about that 60 to 90% gender dysphoria?
Well, that's absolute garbage.
Yes, that's ridiculous. See, that's what I mean by I think she looks for something that backs up her. It's
she's
a confirmation
come up with something
bias
somewhere.
Yeah.
But I don't know where she got that.
Anyway, so
I mean, it's interesting. Elizabeth Riley, Dr. Elizabeth Riley, she's made. Her profession is gender counseling and so on.
In Australia.
And when Scott Morrison, our Prime Minister, talked about gender whisperers, you know, with the same sort of agenda of trying to make it seem like there's something weird and they're trying to turn all the young people into trans people.
Yeah, the trans agenda,
You know, she went through exactly what they do to try and ascertain whether this is actually a deep-seated feeling or whether it is something else.
Yeah.
And it was pretty rigorous.
Yeah.
And this is for children.
Yeah.
She works a lot with children.
Yeah.
And if a person is deemed to be trans, they socially transition as a child. That means they're not given any drugs at all. They're just allowed to live as the gender of their identity. Now, when they reach puberty or are approaching puberty, they may be given puberty blockers. And the reason they give them puberty blockers is because they still don't believe that that person has the right to say how they believe they are and how they want to live.
Yeah.
And so they won't give them hormones. They will give them something which stops the development and gives that person a choice. And then generally at 16, where they're deemed to be able to make their own decisions, then they might be given hormones. Okay, well, these days, no, not everybody goes through surgery. Not everybody needs to go through surgery. You know, it's about what you need in yourself. And your body is really of only interest to yourself and to your sexual partners. You know, there's nobody else who has an interest in it.
Yes.
You know.
But apparently there is.
But apparently there is. Everybody wants to know what's down there in your pants. You know.
I mean, we know a number of people that haven't had gender reassignment surgery and stuff, don't we?
Yeah.
And they probably never will.
And they probably never will.
And they're quite happy that way. They're quite happy living in that way. And so they should be.
A number of them have partners.
Yes.
Some of them have partners from before they transitioned who have stayed with them. Some of them have found partners since.
Is it still called gender reassignment surgery?
No, it's called gender affirmation surgery.
Gender affirmation surgery.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was using an old term.
Yeah.
Okay, so
they change all the time.
yeah, yeah. So
basically, it's there's also different surgeries that are like. Particularly trans men talk about top surgery and bottom surgery.
Yeah, in fact, there's a petition I just signed recently where they're trying to, and many people have signed it in Australia, where they're trying to get Medicare to pay for top and bottom surgery. So that's really good. So anyway, is there anywhere here where anything else you want to say about that? We should probably go on to the
Let me see the bottom of that.
Okay.
A man who intends to have no surgery and take no hormones may now secure himself a gender. Well, it's possible. But how many people would want to do that? I mean, really, how many men would want to be seen legally as female? I mean, aside from the fact that I don't know how it would benefit them in any way, shape, or form, they would get shit from everybody if they said, no, I'm female, and they didn't look that way and they weren't making any kind of effort whatsoever. On the other hand, if somebody looks pretty much like a woman, and
whatever that means today.
Whatever that meant. Well, I mean, that when they walk down the street, people see them as female.
Yeah, read them that way. Yeah.
I mean, Kat Black talks about, for all the online discussion about whether she's really a woman or she's really a man.
She gets read like
that,
she gets.
Every time she walks out the door, she's Miss.
Yeah, sure.
Every time.
Yeah.
Because she transitioned when she was quite young.
Isn't it sad that I often say this, at this late stage we're still fussing about this?
Yeah.
Not fussing about invading countries one after another in imperialist wars that are destroying countries and killing millions of people. No, black and brown people all over the world. No, we're worrying about this.
Well,
which
why
is
are
amazing.
we worrying about this when black people are being murdered?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here in Australia, like they are in the United States.
And black trans women are being murdered.
And black trans women are being murdered at a much higher rate.
Yes.
I mean, it's ridiculous that this kind of backlash against trans people
is coming up at this time.
Basically, bullying. I mean, talking about bullying. Who do you think has more power, J.K. Rowling or somebody on Twitter who's trans?
Yeah, really.
Really? Like J.K. Rowling can say these things and she doesn't see it as bullying at all.
No.
And yet she harms people with this stuff.
Yeah, really, because she has such a huge platform. And I noticed that
and because she feeds into all of the new right and all of the hate and all of the things that motivate the violence, all of the trolls who get on every single trans person's site and just go, you're a boy, you're a man, and on and on and dox them and threaten them and will come around to their homes and and are incredibly actually violent and threatening and they feel like it's just fine.
And a lot of that, also the women that are killed, the black trans women, are often women that have had some intimate sort of experience with some man, and that man knows that they're trans, and then somebody finds out, and because of this transphobic society, they end up, the man ends up killing that trans woman.
Talks about that, that they...
The down low stuff.
They get together with these women knowing that they're trans.
Yes.
And when somebody finds out, well, they can't have it known that they're with a trans person.
Yes.
And so they beat the crap out of them or kill them.
Kill them, exactly. And a couple of women in somewhere in America just in the last couple of months, that's happened to black trans women.
Kat did that YouTube video on it recently about that.
Yeah. And if it wasn't for people reinforcing this transphobia, like J.K. Rowling is doing here, and trying to do it in what she thinks is such a measured way, as if she's really not that. She's really not transphobic.
She's just reasonable.
Yeah,
she's so reasonable, and she's concerned. And
yes.
She's caring and all this sort of
Which
stuff.
I'd prefer she just came out and just say what she is instead of this stuff. But anyway, so I'll go on to here. So, quote, J.K. Rowling goes on.
Anyway, what was that last? I'm sorry. I know that you.
No, well, I don't want to. I don't want
it on.
Yeah, I don't want it to take.
Okay,
too
about
long.
that thing of a gender certificate, you could do well
The gender recognition
legally,
certificate.
but the way you would be treated in society is not good. I mean, if a man wanted to go get a gender recognition certificate and be a woman in the sight of the law, he might be able to do that. But the way he would be treated
Is it he?
would be
The way she
he would be, well, she would be legally, she would be treated.
Yeah.
I'm talking about her example of a man who has no intention, who is not trans.
Oh, really?
A man who
is that
has
what
no
she's worried about?
That's what she's worried about.
Oh,
That's
good
what this is
Lord.
one of the
The whole things of
I mean,
going into the locker rooms and
I mean, honestly,
Oh,
honest to
geez.
God,
Yeah, really.
if somebody wanted to do something like that, well, there's nothing to stop any man from putting on a wig and putting on clothes and trying to get away with something like that.
Yeah. So she's worried about this whole predator, this trans predator.
It's the predator, the male predators.
Yes, sure.
Well, again, if you're really worried about male predators, deal with men.
Isn't that awful, though, that this is sort of like, she's just equating this whole predatory sexual assault sort of thing on,
With
with trans people. That is a typical sort of a alt-right, right-wing position that is put out.
It's basically taking a possibility that never happens and building fear.
Yeah.
And through association, saying that trans people are predatory.
Yes, that's exactly right. Which is what they used to do that's what they used to do to gay and lesbian people, make out that they're all pedophiles or sexual predators.
Yeah, all gay men.
So this is a typical
pedophiles.
this is a typical thing that happens with
when most pedophilia is heterosexual, actually.
Yeah, sure.
And I mean, the perpetration of views or the putting out of views that somehow trans people are not only not valid, but are scary and predatory. When the reality is, trans people tend to be the victims of violence.
Yeah, sure.
They're not the perpetrators of violence. There's almost no evidence for trans people being the perpetrators of violence.
And I think underneath it all, people, I'm not saying she thinks this, but I think people who are transphobic think, good, I'm glad they're the victims of violence. Maybe, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I really do underneath it all. Anyway, so we'll go on to this next paragraph here. So J.K. Rowling goes, we're living through the most misogynistic period I've experienced. Back in the 80s, I imagined that my future daughters, should I have any, would have it far better than I did. But between the backlash against feminism and a porn-saturated online culture, I believe things have got significantly worse for girls. Never have I seen women denigrated and dehumanized to the extent they are now. From the leader of the free world's long history of sexual assault accusations and his proud boast of grabbing them by the pussy, to the incel involuntary celibate movement that rages against women who won't give them sex, to the trans activists who declare that's nice to throw them to trans people in there. Hang on, to the trans activists who declare that TERFs need punching and re-educating. Now, who the hell is that? Anyway, men across the political spectrum seem to agree women are asking for trouble. Everywhere, women are being told to shut up and sit down or else. I love the way she throws trans people in amongst the incels and the grabbing them by the pussy. How lovely. How lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. Well, of
But
course.
she's not transphobic.
She's not transphobic a bit.
No, not a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so...
okay, well, I mean, you've indicated that that's just garbage.
Yeah.
It's obviously...
I agree with the whole misogyny thing. But
the misogyny thing is real.
It's horrific.
But the misogyny towards trans women is just as real.
Yes.
And like, I don't know that, I haven't heard a lot of trans people say TERFs need punching and re-educating.
No.
That's something you're making up.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure you might find somebody who says something like that, but I'm sure I can find some TERFs who say that all trans people should be, rounded up and killed or something.
Yeah, I mean, the generalizations are terrible here. But anyway, so quote.
Well, it's not just the generalizations, it's the associations.
Yeah, sure. Well, yes, I just mentioned that.
Made.
Yeah, she's tacking them together, conflating it all.
And if anything, it is the so-called TERFs who are more linked to the incels and the alt-right. It is those people who are arguing against trans people, and the alt-right are arguing against trans people, and the Catholic Church is, and those are the people who are telling women to sit down and shut up.
Yeah.
So I don't understand, she's associating the wrong people with the alt-right.
Yeah.
There is certainly, and it is what I was talking about, that international push to wind back the social justice gains of the last few decades.
Yeah.
And it is certainly aimed at women, but it is aimed first off at trans people because they're low-hanging fruit. Low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And then at gay and lesbian people because they're next on the list.
Yeah.
And then at women.
Yeah.
And it going towards all of them. But,
Anyway.
Trans people are first on the list.
Yeah.
Because they're the easiest ones.
Yeah. Anyway,
and she's joined them.
Yeah. So J.K. Rowling writes, I've read all the arguments about femaleness not residing in the sex body and the assertions that biological women don't have common experiences, and I find them too deeply misogynistic and repressive. It's also clear that one of the objectives of denying the importance of sex is to erode what some seem to see as the cruelly segregationist idea of women having their own biological realities, or just as threatening, unifying realities that make them a cohesive political class. The hundreds of emails I've received in the last few days prove the erosion concerns many others just as much. It isn't enough for women to be trans allies. Women must accept and admit that there is no material difference between trans women and themselves.
The arguments about femaleness not residing in the sex body and assertions biological women don't have common experiences. Okay, I don't know anybody who has asserted that biological women don't have common experiences. I think there are assertions that are true that not all experiences women have are held in common, that there is a diversity within women that results in diverse experience, that there are women who grew up with two mothers or two fathers, women who grew up in permissive households, women who and supportive households, women who have grown up with single parents, women who have grown up in repressive religious families, women who, there's all kinds of stuff women have had. Now, of course, there are a number of experiences women may have in common, but how they interpret those experiences, most women, and I won't say all women because there are always exceptions, most women have periods. Okay. But what a period means to a woman and how they deal with that is different. And the group of women as a class, as an identity class, that's not about experience particularly. I mean, in part it is, but it is a political commonality. It is an identity that they have, has been imposed on them structurally. That's what feminism is about. And that structure is repressive in similar ways. And of course, it does differ with class and race and a number of other factors, age, how women are treated varies, but how women grew up and are socialized also varies. Women who are living within basically a lesbian community in gay-friendly neighborhoods in an urban environment have a really different time than women who are living in a rural area where there is some dominant repressive religion. And, their experiences aren't the same. And the fact that I'm saying that women's experiences are diverse doesn't mean that biological women don't have common experiences, full stop. Obviously they do have some, but obviously they also have diverse experiences. Not all experiences are common. That femaleness, residing in the sexed body, yes and no. If somebody is treated as a woman from the age of, 4, like some trans people are these days, it's really hard to claim that, but they have a sex body which is different. They cannot have the experiences women have. That's nonsense. They have a lot of common experiences. The thing is, biological women and trans women also have common experiences. Both trans women and cis women, when they go through a park at night, have to worry about rapists. When they go to a party on their own, they have to worry about how much alcohol they're consuming, whether they're putting themselves in danger, all of that kind of stuff. When they go for a job, they have to worry about how they're presenting themselves and whether there is going to be some sort of discrimination against them as women. And it doesn't matter whether they were born or whether they have a vagina or not. Nobody asks you that when you go for a job. Nobody asks you that when you walk through a park. That isn't the question. The thing is, there are very few cases where your biology makes a difference in the way you're treated. How you're perceived does.
Yes, that's true. So anyway, so J.K. Rowling writes, but as many women have said before me, quote, woman, end quote, is not a costume. A woman is not an idea in a man's head.
Okay, now she's just said for trans women, being a woman is a costume.
Yeah.
That's essentially what she's just said.
Yeah. Woman is not a pink brain, a liking for Jimmy Choos, or any other of these sexist ideas now somehow touted as progressive. Moreover, the inclusive language that calls...
Who touts them as progressive?
Yeah, I know. Who the hell touts them? I was just thinking, who is she knocking around with? You know what I mean?
She's hanging out with the wrong people.
Yeah. Moreover, the, quote, inclusive, end quote, language that calls female people, quote, menstruators, end quote, and, quote, people with vulvas, end quote, strikes many women as dehumanizing and demeaning. I understand why trans activists consider this language to be appropriate and kind, but for those of us who had degrading slurs spat at us by violent men, it's not neutral, it's hostile and alienating.
I don't understand how saying, pregnant people instead of pregnant women, so that you're including trans men who happen to be pregnant, possibly has any relevance or association with slurs by mean, nasty men.
I don't either.
How does that do anything? And why would you be assaulted by the idea of saying a pregnant person?
It's very essentialist is what this is.
Yeah, it's like the people who used to argue that the race of man, or mankind, was neutral. Well, it's not neutral.
No.
It's, and that's why we use humanity or people instead of mankind, because we're not all men. And people objected to that. People had a hard time. Men had a hard time dealing with that. How can you say mankind is perfectly respectable?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Anyway, it's funny how she brings that together. But anyway.
But that costume thing, like,
yeah, that's weird.
That is exactly what they're saying.
Yes.
That when she asserts that, biological sex is all that matters.
Yeah.
She's basically saying all trans people are just, people wearing a costume.
Yeah, yeah. So, and then she says, J.K. Rowling says, which brings me to the fifth reason I'm deeply concerned about the consequences of the current trans activism. Quote, she says, I've been in the public eye now for over 20 years and have never talked publicly about being a domestic abuse and sexual assault survivor. This isn't because I'm ashamed those things happened to me, but because they're traumatic to revisit and remember. I also feel protective of my daughter from my first marriage. I didn't want to claim sole ownership of a story that belongs to her too. However, a short while ago, I asked her how she'd feel if I were publicly honest about that part of my life, and she encouraged me to go ahead. I'm mentioning these things now not in an attempt to garner sympathy, but out of solidarity with the huge numbers of women who have histories like mine who've been slurred as bigots for having concerns about single-sex spaces. There once again she's equating trans people with being
predators,
with being predators.
And rapists.
Oh, that's not transphobic.
No,
and rapists. How lovely.
And let me say, you and I have both. Are both sexual rape survivors.
Yes.
And sexual abuse survivors.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Well, I'm not. I'm a rape survivor, and you've actually had abuse within your family, and and also
Yeah, well, we won't go into that right now.
No, we won't go into that.
Yeah.
Did you want me to say that?
No,
you're
that's okay.
With that.
I don't know.
I think that you're.
Mine was kind of horrific, but that's,
yes.
How does that relate to trans people?
Yeah.
Trans people are often sexual rape survivors and have had sexual abuse.
I'm not even sure how conscious she is every time she kind of conflates those two things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know how, it's almost like she's so, I think, I don't know, I sort of wonder if how much she's had therapy over this, really, because it's like,
except it is the main thing that you hear from transphobic women all the time.
But that's what I mean.
The claim that trans people are all rapists trying to invade women's spaces.
Yes, but I don't sometimes, and exactly, and that is something that's almost like a trope thing. Is that it? Can you say that? But it's like
it's a basic ideological.
But I don't. I sometimes even wonder that sometimes these women are so kind of almost beside themselves with that their own trauma that I don't even know. I'm not even sure sometimes how much they are aware that they are conflating those things. In every paragraph, in some way, she has stitched those two things together, trans activist and predator. Now, if she has and she's done it consciously, and that's quite probable, right?
Well, if she's done it consciously, it's evil.
Yes, it's evil. And if she hasn't, then she's,
in a real social sense.
Yes, in a real social sense. And I think some of those women do that. Some, transphobic women do that. Yeah. But if she hasn't, then, and I often sort of I looked at those two women from the Women Speak Tasmania, those two transphobic women, and I felt like they had real issues, in themselves. Yeah. It looked like they were really, you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying?
Spend so much of their life.
Yes.
Involved in hating trans people.
Yes, and I feel like it's really got some whole other thing going on with them in their past that they haven't dealt with.
Not just hating them, but trying to.
But they haven't dealt with something, and they're trying to project. I feel like they're almost trying to project the hatred that they've had of bad experiences with men, right? Yeah. And projecting it onto trans women because they won't. You know what I'm saying? And almost as if that they're in danger now because there's these men pretending to be women that are coming to get them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's that kind of sort of weird sort of thing. Anyway, but so anyhow, I'll just go on. But I this is over and over again. She's doing this in this explanation. She's stitching it together.
Every time I go into a toilet, a public toilet, I kind of have a quick look just to see if there's any weird people in there. It's just like when you get into a car.
Except for you, any weird people. And me. If I'm there, I'm another weird person.
Yeah. But I mean, when I say weird people, I mean potentially predatory people trying to...
Sure. It's a survival thing that a lot of women do.
It's a survival thing that women do.
Yeah.
It's just like looking in the back of your car before you get into it.
Yeah.
It's just, you just do it.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, you may be in deep shit.
Women have to be unfortunately.
We shouldn't.
We shouldn't have to be, but we have to be always in a kind of a vigilant, what is it? Hypervigilance.
Hypervigilance.
To ensure safety, and sometimes that doesn't work, sadly, particularly when you're in a situation which is often the case where women are raped by people they know. So those people that do, those men that do that know that you are you're feeling comfortable and trustworthy, and that's why they do it, because they know that they can get away with. Sorry, I just got cut off there. I was just saying that, and that's why a lot of male perpetrators get away with that with women they know, because the woman has felt comfortable in their presence and made themselves vulnerable. And then that's often that's the majority of rapes, is that women know the perpetrator. They're either friends or they're family or some relative, and that's unfortunately how it goes. So sadly, women, if they're not it's sad if you have to be hyper vigilant around friends and family and relatives and stuff. But anyway, so let's go on to the next section.
And there's that whole thing that, like when some woman does get raped, and the response from the police is often, well, you just need to be more careful.
Yes. And we all know you should be able to.
Heaven, how careful do you have to be?
In the 80s, I remember feminists used to say you should be able to cartwheel in a mall naked, and you don't deserve to be raped. That's what they used to say. Anyway, so and that still applies today. Anyway, so let's see where we've gone. Okay. And J.K. Rowling goes on to say, I'm mentioning these things now not in an attempt to garner sympathy, but out of solidarity with huge numbers of women who have histories like mine, who've been slurred as bigots for having concerns about single-sex spaces. I think I've already read that one. So I managed to escape my first violent marriage with some difficulty, but I'm now married to a truly good and principled man, safe and secure in ways I never in a million years expected to be. However, the scars left by violence and sexual assault don't disappear, no matter how loved you are and no matter how much money you've made. My perennial jumpiness is a family joke, and even I know it's funny, but I pray my daughters never have the same reasons I do for hating sudden loud noises or finding people behind me when I haven't heard them approaching. If you come inside my head and understand, no, thank you. If you come inside my head, that's rude. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. If you come inside my head and understand what I feel when I read about a trans woman dying at the hands of a violent man, you find solidarity and kinship. I have a visceral sense of the terror in which those trans women will have spent their last seconds on earth, because I, too, have known moments of blind fear when I realized the only thing keeping me alive was the shaky self-restraint of my attacker. I believe the majority of trans-identified people, she goes on to say, not only pose zero threat to others. See, now she's just contradicting herself here, but anyway, but are vulnerable for all the reasons I've outlined. Trans people need and deserve protection. Like women, they're most likely to be killed by sexual partners. Trans women who work... Oh, she actually used the word trans women. Trans women who work in the sex industry, particularly trans women of colour, are at particular risk. Like every other domestic abuse and sexual assault survivor I know, I feel nothing but empathy and solidarity with trans women who have been abused by men. So I want trans women to be safe. At the same time, I do not want to make natal girls and women less safe. When you throw open the doors of bathrooms and changing rooms to any man who believes or feels he's a woman, and as I've said, gender confirmation certificates may now be granted without any need for surgery or hormones, then you open the door to any and all men who wish to come inside. That is the simple truth. Oy vey. So she's just kind of contradicted herself.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, any man, they don't have to dress up like a woman to come in.
They don't have to go and get a...
no, they don't have to get a confirmation certificate. To go into any bathroom and rape a woman there or sexually assault children, which happens on a regular basis where men go into bathroom.
Rape is illegal no matter who does it.
Yeah, and they don't have to, they just go in. They don't have to be dressing up like anything and pretending to be anything. They just do it.
Yeah.
So this is just a nonsense.
Yeah.
And if they wanted to anyway, they could if they wanted to. I mean, but why would they? They just go in and do it.
Guards of the doors of bathrooms.
Yeah. I mean,
guards
seriously.
On the doors of changing rooms.
See, and there she goes.
And a man can walk in there as a man, and that's one of the reasons.
And there she goes once again.
We do sit there and check out the bathroom before we get comfortable.
And there she goes once again. Imagine if this was about black people, and basically all throughout an essay, you're equating black people with being racist. Being rapists.
Yeah.
Imagine that. Now, if people could just look at this.
I don't want to share cafes or the front of the bus with somebody who might rape and beat me. Well, if you said that, about black people,
I mean, but this is the thing.
The same thing.
This is seen as like, imagine if this was a letter that was about black people and equating them with being sexual predators and rapists.
Yeah.
That would, I would hope that people would be going, that's outrageous. But because it's about trans people, trans women, it's like because there is so much transphobia in society right now, she can get away with doing this, and yet the whole thing.
That, like she said, oh, well, it's only because of the special qualities of confirmation certificates that can be granted without surgery. It isn't. No. If you look at the transphobia around bathrooms and stuff like that, it's we don't want any trans people here.
Yeah.
Any trans people.
Yeah.
We don't want any trans people here.
Yeah.
We don't want trans people. That's what they say.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
That's what they're saying again and again. And she can talk about all the empathy she has, and then she kills any claim to empathy.
Yes.
As soon as she turns around and says that sort of shit.
Yeah, I think that's really disingenuous saying all of that, and then she once again returns to the equating trans women and that whole thing with being a sexual predator. I mean, this is the sort of thing they used to do with gay and lesbian people. That they were sexual deviants and that they were...
You couldn't have them teaching a school.
No, this is exactly the same thing.
What might they do?
It's like we're going back to the fucking 60s and 70s.
Yeah, she talks about going backwards for women.
Yeah.
Well, she's going backwards in terms of queer people.
Yes.
She's pushing that same backwards agenda.
Yes.
Let's move it back into the 50s.
Yeah, really. So anyway, we're getting to the end here. We're probably coming to the probably past the 2 hour mark. Anyway, so J.K. Rowling goes on. On Saturday morning, by the way, this was posted on the 10th of June 2020 on her Twitter site, which she won't allow.
That's today.
Which she won't allow people to make comment on except people that she
likes,
deems acceptable.
Who is going to be supportive.
J.K. Rowling writes, on Saturday morning I read that the Scottish Government is proceeding with its controversial gender recognition plans, which will in effect mean that all a man needs to, quote, become a woman, end quote, is to say he's one. To use a very contemporary word, I was, quote, triggered, end quote, going down all the relentless attacks from trans activists on social media when I was only there to give children feedback about pictures they'd drawn for my book Under Lockdown. I spent much of Saturday in a very dark place inside my head as memories of a serious sexual assault I suffered in my 20s recurred. Here she goes again.
Okay.
Recurred on a loop.
I think if she's going to be a high-profile transphobe, on an ongoing way, then when she shows up for kids to do, she's liable to get flack.
Yeah.
because she is she's chosen to be a high-profile transphobe.
This is what this says to me. This whole essay says to me, she has very deep unresolved issues. She's got some sort of PTSD about about sexual violence in her past, and she is projecting all of that onto a group because they're an easy target. I feel like it's actually, I'm not even sure, like she believes that this is what I feel, okay? I don't know if this is truly what she thinks, but this is what I feel, is that she believes that trans people who say they're women and they're trans women, she believes they're really men pretending to be women. Wearing a costume. That's what she thinks. And so
that includes her good friend who she sees as a woman.
That's right. So she doesn't actually really believe, she's not a friend of trans people. She's just a straight out transphobe who doesn't really understand at all what it's like to be trans. She doesn't really understand it at all. And she is afraid of her own history and is projecting that onto people that she thinks are men pretending to be women. So that's what I feel about this anyway. So
and I mean, honest to God, I think if she's been abused, and I have no doubt that she has been, because most women have been, and that includes trans women.
And she said
then I would still say, I'll bet almost anything that the people who abused her were not trans.
No, exactly.
So what is all this about trans people being abusive?
I know we're all different, but I mean, I've been assaulted and raped too, but I don't freak out when I've known trans people.
By a friend.
Yes, that was by a friend, a male friend who I used to do yoga with every day.
And the thing is,
and that's only one. That's one of a few. I only speak about that because.
And that doesn't mean you don't have male friends.
No, and I have very good male friends. The ones I have are very good. I think they're great. I have no problem with men, and I certainly have never even for a second, in the decades that I've known trans people, have ever been remotely. In fact, I'm comforted by just like any woman that I've been in company with, I feel totally comfortable in their company. It's never even occurred to me that something like that would happen. So I don't even. It just shows. I feel like J.K. Rowling. She talks about that trans woman that she's friends with, and yet actually has just insulted her in this essay.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure that woman feels just terrible about, really. Basically saying she's not.
She may give her a pass. I don't know.
Yeah, but anyway, yeah. So anyhow, that it's just sort of sad. It's sad that she's just showing us really how traumatized she is from her life through sexual assault by cisgendered men.
Yeah.
Yes, by cisgendered men, and she's projecting that onto trans women, and that's just really sad. Anyway, so I'll go on with that sentence.
The thing is, she spends a lot of effort and increasingly more of her time and her attention and so on having a go at trans people.
Yeah.
But she's not spending that same effort and whatever, having a go at violent men.
No, exactly.
And why is that?
Yes, why is that? They get a pass, obviously.
They get a pass.
Or there's this thing where, and in our society, Dee, in patriarchal society, it's accepted that men are violent and that men rape and that men perpetrate domestic violence, and it's normalized almost that that's going to happen. It's not like, let's look at the way we raise, there are people who look at that, of course, the way we raise male children, but basically on the whole, we treat the symptoms of it, like domestic violence, shelters for women and all this sort of stuff, when really, why are these women having to escape these violent men and spend the rest of their lives running, trying to, changing their names, and when they leave a marriage of domestic violence, they're in more danger of being killed. Why do women always have to be protecting themselves when it's really, why aren't we looking and really, really focusing on the dangerous and toxic stereotypes that allow these men to think that that women are property and that their children are property, and when they're disillusioned with the world, they have the right to kill their partner, their female partner, and their children, no matter what age they are. The whole family, they take the whole family out. Do you see women?
Because it's theirs.
Yeah. Do you see women? Yeah. Do you see women who are depressed and disillusioned with the world killing the male partner and all their children because they're upset with the world? No, we don't. Occasionally, you might find a woman that kills their children, but it's not a common thing.
Or kills their spouse. Usually that's a case of extreme abuse.
Yeah, extreme, abuse. But basically, it is not something that happens. It is definitely a majority of there is domestic violence where women hit men and all that kind of thing, and I'm sure there'll be some man will come on the thread here. It always is.
Men?
What about men? What about men? There's always that. Every time you bring up women's issues, there will be some men that has to come on and say, what about men? Even though the majority of victims of violence is women.
Well, most of the problems men have are due to patriarchy.
Yeah, true.
And trying to live up to patriarchy, or trying to, or not living up to patriarchy, or whatever.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, very true. Anyway, so anyhow, where are we up to here now? She went on to say, I spent much of Saturday in a very dark place inside my head as memories of a sexual assault I suffered in my 20s recurred on a loop. The assault happened at a time and in a space where I was vulnerable, and a man capitalized on an opportunity. I couldn't shut out those memories, and I was finding it hard to contain my anger and disappointment about the way I believe my government is playing fast and loose with women and girls' safety. Now, I'm very sorry that she experienced that.
Yeah, but I bet that man didn't have a wig.
No, I'm very sorry that she experienced that, and I hope that she heals from that, and I hope that she's getting therapy about that and all of that. To find a woman who hasn't experienced some sort of sexual assault or harassment or rape or whatever, domestic violence or, incest or whatever, is very, very remote to find a woman that hasn't had that in their life.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, obviously she's got a number of issues. Anyway, so anyway, she goes, late on Saturday evening, scrolling through children's pictures before I went to bed, I forgot the first rule of Twitter: never ever expect a nuanced conversation, and reacted to what I felt was degrading language about women. I spoke up about the importance of sex and have been paying the price ever since. I was transphobic. I was a cunt, a bitch, a turf. I deserve cancelling, punching, and death. You are Voldemort, said one person, clearly feeling this was the only language I understand. It would be so much easier to tweet the approved hashtags because, of course, trans rights are human rights, and, of course, trans lives matter. Scoop up the woke cookies and bask in a virtue signaling afterglow. There's joy, relief, and safety in conformity. Oh, God, conformity. As Simone de Beauvoir also wrote, quote, without a doubt, it is more comfortable to endure blind bondage than to work for one's liberation. The dead, too, are better suited to the earth than the living, end quote. Huge numbers of women are justifiably terrified by the trans activists. I know this because so many have got in touch with me to tell their stories. They're afraid of doxing, of losing their jobs, of their livelihoods, and of violence. She goes on, but endlessly unpleasant as its constant targeting of me has been, I refuse to bow down to a movement what is this movement that is harassing her, that I believe is doing demonstrable harm in seeking to erode quote-unquote women as a political and biological class and offering to cover to predators like few before it. I stand alongside the brave women and men, gay, straight and trans, who's standing up for freedom of speech and thought and for the rights and safety of some of the most vulnerable in our society, young gay kids, fragile teenagers, and women who are reliant on and wish to retain their single-sex spaces. Polls show those women are in the vast majority and exclude only those privileged or lucky enough never to have come up against male violence or sexual assault, and who've never troubled to educate themselves on how prevalent it is. The one thing that gives me hope, she goes on to say, this is J.K. Rowling, is that women who can protest and organise are doing so, and they have some truly decent men and trans people alongside them. Oh, yeah. Political parties seeking to appease the loudest voices in the debate are ignoring women's concerns at their peril. In the UK, women are reaching out to each other across party lines, concerned about the erosion of their hard-won rights and widespread intimidation. None of the gender-critical women I've talked to hates trans people. On the contrary, many of them became interested in this issue in the first place out of concern for trans youth, and they're hugely sympathetic towards trans adults who simply want to live their lives, but who are facing a backlash for a brand of activism they don't endorse. The supreme irony is that the attempt to silence women with the word TERF may have pushed more young women towards radical feminism than the movement's seen in decades. The last thing I want to say, I've written this essay in the hope that anybody will get out of I haven't written this essay in the hope that anybody will get out a violin for me, not even a teeny-weeny one. I'm extraordinarily fortunate. I'm a survivor, certainly not a victim. I've only mentioned my past because, like every other human being on the planet, I have a complex backstory which shapes my fears, my interests, and my opinions. I never forget that inner complexity when I'm creating a fictional character, and I certainly never forget it when it comes to trans people. All I want is for similar empathy, similar understanding to be extended to the many millions of women whose sole crime is wanting their concerns to be heard without receiving threats and abuse. That's the end.
Yeah, all I can see is, like with all of this, whenever anybody does an action, or particularly where somebody puts out something, uses their platform to put forward an idea, you have to consider what is the likely outcome of that. What seems to be the desired outcome? Yeah. And the desired outcome here seems to be to portray trans people as predators, to try and make recognition of trans people more difficult, to make sure that children aren't able to transition until they're going to have massive problems transitioning, or try and make it so that they can't transition at all, to empower women to use law to work against trans people.
And that trans women are really just men in dresses pretending to be women. That's the other thing she's putting out here.
Well, that's an idea she's putting out, but I mean the outcome is to try and ban trans women from bathrooms like they do in the United States.
She wouldn't if she met all the children that are trans, that you wouldn't even know that they were trans, right?
Yeah.
And that will probably be the case when they grow up. You won't know they're trans either. And they'll be the ones going into the bathroom. She won't even know that they're
Well, a lot of the trans women now, I mean, you wouldn't know.
Exactly, but I'm saying...
It's like Cat
who
Black
exactly
says,
is she?
Every time she walks out the door, she's seen as a woman.
But I'm saying...
She's seen as a black woman, but she's seen as a woman.
I don't know who she's thinking of. And it doesn't matter, even if they didn't look at all passable, in quotes. It doesn't matter. It's just this whole projection.
Well, the thing is, if somebody doesn't look so passable, they're probably scared out of their wits to go into a bathroom.
Absolutely.
And really nervous that the last thing they want is to be confronted or made uncomfortable, and they're probably in huge fear of that.
Yeah.
They would want to get in there and do their business and get out as quickly as they can.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reality.
Yeah.
And it's only the people who tend to be really passable. And this whole notion of passable is really sad.
Yes, it's really sad.
But it's only but I mean, it's real too.
It's real. That's why we use it, because it's real.
It makes a difference for people.
It does.
The people who are fairly passable can walk into a toilet and use it, and that's probably all right. They probably end up feeling fairly comfortable after a few years of worry.
And who was that woman who was that trans woman who was doing that makeup thing, and somebody tried to extort her? She tried to extort her.
Recently, there was oh goodness, what was her name? We'll put it in the
Yeah.
something, but it was something like
she came out as
Nikki
trans,
something or other,
and nobody knew she was trans until she actually came out.
She'd been doing makeup. She's hugely popular on YouTube, and followed by millions of people.
Yeah. And somebody tried to extort her.
Nobody knew that she was trans, including most trans people.
Yeah.
You know, people have said, "Oh, I always knew," but no, no, she was indistinguishable.
Yeah, and somebody tried to extort her.
Somebody tried to blackmail her.
And she
that's why she came out. She said, rather than be blackmailed,
yeah, but
I'll
I mean,
come
if
out.
we didn't have a transphobic society, there wouldn't have been that sort of opportunity for that person to think that they could blackmail her.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I mean, it's like gay people couldn't work in government.
It wouldn't matter, basically.
Couldn't work in government during the 50s and 60s because if they were discovered, they might be blackmailed and people could get secrets.
Yeah, that's right.
But all that needed to be done to avoid that blackmail is make it fine to be gay.
And any of these neoconservative governments are all trying to, get things to wind back to the 50s. And that includes any gains that LGBT people have made,
and
even women have made. And, it goes on. But anyway, that's all we'll talk. Is there anything else you want to say, Dee Dee?
No, just that, like, in a sense, by their fruits you shall know them, to put in a good Christian thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what she's done really feeds into all of the worst prejudices and all of the worst kind of tropes and stuff. And it is exactly the same stuff that the new right and the bigots and the alt-right and that kind of stuff say about trans people.
Yeah.
It is exactly the stuff that the people who want to ban trans people from bathrooms in the United States, who would like to ban them from this and ban them from that, ban them from teaching schools. It is exactly that rhetoric that she is using and feeding into.
Yeah, and it's very sad because
it supports all of those bigots.
Yeah, and
those are the people she is supporting.
Yeah, and it's very sad, that all those young children who grew up on her books and everything, I'm sure a lot of them are probably very disappointed with her, and there'll be some that will be trans and they'll probably be devastated. And just speaking of people involved in that Harry Potter franchise, Daniel Radcliffe recently has separated himself from J.K. Rowling's transphobia by saying he's totally supportive of trans people, and so hopefully others will in that franchise will come out and do that, because I think I think history won't.
And he's not doing it because of bullying.
No.
He's doing it because he thinks what she's doing is bigoted and unfair.
Yeah, and if she can't recognise her own, she either can't recognise her own bigotry, or she's being incredibly disingenuous and just trying to make it all sound very pretty, and that she's really not like that, and that she's just concerned about young people and all this sort of stuff, which I hate when people do that, when they mix
gaslighting.
in. Yeah, gaslighting. That's what it is. But anyway, it's very sad.
It's an abusive thing where you say, I really care about you.
Yeah.
I just hit you because, I was trying to help you.
Yeah. It reminds me of that, though, when she says, I really love trans people and I really care about them. And then, meanwhile, she's attaching sexual predation onto them all the way through.
And you're invalidating their identity. And I'm sorry, if you do that, you don't love trans people.
No, you don't even understand
you're not helping them and you're not working
Don't even
them.
Understand it. Anyway, thanks so much, Dee Dee, for chatting with me about it. It was fun. I
always liked having chats with you.
Yes.
It
was
nice
very...
when you invite me into
Oh, of course. Anybody who's still hanging in here after over 2 hours, you obviously are interested in this, and I hope that you found it somewhat interesting and insightful. And Dee Dee's always a wealth of knowledge on a lot of things, and you can check out Dee Dee's channel.
And so is Trish.
You can check out Dee Dee's channel, If Life is a Leaf. That's If Life, L-I-F-E, is a L-E-A-F, leaf, on YouTube. So she doesn't post very often, but when she does, it's very, very interesting.
I'm going to start posting
but Dee Dee says she's going to start posting more often.
I'm about to get a phone that I can use.
Yeah, she's about to get a phone she can use that actually works rather than
My Baudry one.
that's dying. Okay, well, anyway, we'll leave it here. So thanks so much for watching.
Now, most of the things I post, just to let people know, are probably going to be about the environment and politics rather than gender and sexual stuff.
Yeah. So anyway, thanks so much for watching. My name's Trish Roberts, and this is Dee Dee River, and you're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Thanks very much. Till next time, bye for now.
Bye.